Welcome to Ghostly Tales channel. Are you looking for creepy, mysterious, and dramatic stories? You have come to the right place. Here, we will bring you unforgettable experiences with ghost stories, terrifying urban legends and mysteries that you have never dared to explore. Come with us into the world of mysteries, where every sound can make your heart beat faster. Please listen, everyone. The Devil's Symphony Chapter 1, Rainy Night Dream. Outside, the sky was filled with thunder and lightning, and it was unknown what time it was. Inside the majestic castle, a girl with very long black hair appeared. She was wearing a white dress and was sitting in front of a mirror, holding a comb to comb her hair. In that room, besides the girl's silhouette and the dressing table, there was also an expensive piano behind her. The girl kept on blowing her hair for a long time. She never turned around, and she couldn't even see the mirror. The movement of blowing her hair kept repeating itself mechanically, until the sound of a piano began to play. The piece of music sounded very familiar. It turned out to be Beethoven's Moonlight Symphony. Who played? The piano. Looking towards the piano, there was no one sitting there, but the keys automatically rang out, as if someone was pressing the keys. Turning back to the girl, he saw a mirror. But the reflection in the mirror was a gaunt face, with sunken eye sockets. The hand holding the piano was all bones, just like a skeleton. Zhang Yijun woke up with a start. He was in a hotel room he had just rented this afternoon. The air conditioner was still on, but he was drenched in sweat. He reached out to turn on the night light on the table and looked at his watch. It was just past midnight. He had countless nightmares before, but tonight's dream was so vivid it felt real. He got out of bed, walked to the window, lifted the curtains, and looked out. His room was a luxury room, with windows facing a beautiful green park. Outside, it was still raining, windy, and thundering, covering the sky in red. Zhang Yijun, who had an occupational disease, couldn't help but think that the current situation was indeed a bit like that dream. Zhang Yijun is 28 years old this year, and is a very famous detective horror novelist. He started writing at the age of 20, and has written 7 famous works to date. His fan base has tens of millions of people. Zhang Yijun's rule is to only write 1 novel per year, no more, no less. But since the beginning of the year, he has not had any ideas. The other day, a friend introduced him to this city. She said he would definitely find inspiration here. But tonight, he has not yet entered the city, but it has already welcomed him with a dream. Unable to sleep, he turned on the computer and typed random ideas until morning. The next morning, the rain had stopped completely, and the air in the suburbs was very good. Zhang Yijun checked out of the hotel just after 6 o'clock, and he looked out at the lush green forest with some regret. The black BMW i8, although not too expensive, still attracted everyone's attention. This made Zhang Yijun give up the idea of staying in the suburbs and drive straight into City H. After passing a short stretch of the National Highway, he saw the H City Gate. Looking at the bustling and splendid appearance of the city, he thought that how could there be any ideas here? This was a place for partying and having fun. But before that thought could finish, he suddenly stepped on the brakes. In front of him, the luxurious gate had turned into strange letters. The entire scene in front of him suddenly turned dark, and a few blurry, horrifying scenes flashed by. The loud honking of the car behind him woke Zhang Yijun up. It turned out that the city was still a luxurious city. There were a few curses from the driver behind him, because he almost hit his expensive car. He stuck his head out of the car window and kept apologizing. The middle-aged driver seemed annoyed and muttered, "Young people with money these days really have no dignity. They don't even have a driver's license, yet they're running out on the street with billions in their hands. It's really a shame for us drivers." Zhang Yijun smiled bitterly, kept apologizing for a few more hours before driving away. It was only natural, earning money as easily as him. A few billion was nothing, but for a poor person paying for a scratch on his car was also a big deal. Walking around the bustling city center, even though it was only early in the morning, everything was bustling. Zhang Yijun took out his phone and called someone and turned on the speaker. The phone rang a few times. Someone picked up. It was a woman's voice. Zhang Yijun spoke first. "Hi Thuong, are you free? Let's go have lunch." The female voice on the speaker said very strongly, "It's only 10 a.m. You're not crazy, right? I just started work. Are you trying to make the boss fire me?" "Hi Thuong, stop talking nonsense. Who would dare fire you?" Truong Di Quan was completely joking. Lahai Thuong said, "Where are you? Find a good restaurant and send me the location." Zhang Yijun turned off his phone. pulled over to the side of the road, and searched for a good restaurant online. Nowadays, there is everything on the internet. You just need to type in the content you want to search for. At 11 a.m., Zhang Yijuan found a pretty good restaurant recommended online. He booked a table, then sent the location to Lu Haithuang. Less than 10 minutes later, Lu Haithuang appeared in a business suit. She wore high heels and her hair was tied up high, looking exactly like a successful businesswoman. As soon as she sat down, Lu Haithuang said, "You're quite good. How did you know this place was near my office?" "What don't I know? It's not difficult at all to investigate a little about the woman that Zhang Yijuan is interested in." As soon as Trong Di Quan finished speaking, he was kicked in the leg by Lu Haithuang. He gritted his teeth and said resentfully, "What a cruel woman. This is a warning to you. If you keep talking crazy, I will cut your tongue off." Lu Haithuang is not a beauty, but her face and temperament are really attractive. The two of them are from the same hometown. After graduating from high school, Trong Di Quan failed the university entrance exam. Then he gave up on retaking the exam and went to City D to start working as a flower grower. Lu Haithuang went to university to study journalism, then stayed in the current City H to work. When she had just graduated, thanks to a photo, she was recruited to work at a large company. After only 5 years, Lu Haithuang climbed to the position of department head. That proved that her professional ability was very high. Speaking of why Zhang Yijuan came to City D to grow flowers for hire, it was because he had an undying passion for flowers. When he was in school, he didn't study properly and spent all day reading books on growing flowers. Because of this kind of fate, after arriving in City D for less than a year, he started writing. City D was famous for its haunted pine hills, and the flower garden was right next to those pine hills. After experiencing the strange things happening at the pine hills every night, Zhang Yijuan started to have the idea of writing horror stories. A person who never went to college and was not good at literature in high school can become a famous novelist. This proves that his imagination is not ordinary at all. While eating, Trong Di Quan said, "Look at this bustling city. It's not even 1/10 as bustling as City D. How the hell can I have any ideas?" "Zhang Yijuan, you've been my friend for quite a while. With your personality, if you didn't have any ideas, you wouldn't invite me to dinner. Am I right?" Lu Haithuang, although thin, ate very well. Her colleagues often teased her that she was possessed by a hungry ghost, so no matter how much she ate, she would never gain weight. Trong Di Quan did not deny that he was starting to have something for this city, so he said, "All right, eat yours. Haithuang, do you know of any good hotels, preferably with balconies overlooking deserted streets?" Lu Haithuang quickly swallowed the piece of meat, took out his phone, and then gave it to Trong Di Quan. "My friend happens to be running a hotel similar to your request. What do you think of this view?" Trong Di Quan looked at it and nodded, saying, "Very good. Please help me book a long-term room." After saying goodbye to Lu Haithuang, Trong Di Quan went around shopping for some miscellaneous items. Since he didn't have much luggage, he only brought the necessary things. City H had unpredictable weather and rain. Even though it was only March, there was a huge downpour. Trong Di Quan drove out of the shopping mall, then turned on the hotel's GPS. It was only just after 4 p.m., but it was surprisingly dark. The news on the bus said that the rain this evening would probably last for about 4.5 hours. Because of the heavy rains over the past 2 days, the flooding was very high, and city residents were asked to be careful when going out. The traffic here is not like in City D. The traffic is heavy and the roads are small. Taking a car out during rush hour is a very stupid thing to do, because the traffic jams are terrible. It is rush hour plus the heavy rain, the traffic is jammed. For nearly an hour, they can only barely move 1 kilometer. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, the drains were starting to stop flowing, the water was flooding. The news kept warning of heavy rain and flooding. Even though there was a traffic jam, he still sat in his car, but the poor motorcyclists. Some had their engines stalled and had to push them. Some had their bikes overturned over potholes. Zhang Yijuan really admired Lu Haithuang for being able to stay here for so long. 15 kilometers to the hotel, it was raining heavily and gradually darkening. The water was starting to rise. The street lights on both sides were a cold yellow, looking extremely desolate. It was already miserable enough, but at that moment, in the distance, the police were blocking the road. For some reason, the road ahead had seriously eroded, requiring vehicles to turn around. Zhang Yijuan gripped the steering wheel tightly. already thinking of another solution. It would be very difficult to turn around in the middle of the road. He slowly moved the car forward, saw a fork in the road ahead, turned right, then turned into a few more alleys. He was fed up with this scene. He definitely had to stay somewhere else for the night. After running for a while, Truong Di Quan saw a motel signboard in the distance with flashing lights. He slowed down and saw the 4 words Chiu Han Motel on the signboard. The signboard was old, the lights were on and off, and the sky was currently as miserable as that signboard. Truong Di Quan pressed his face against the car window and looked around. Strange, even though it was raining heavily, there was no need to close the windows and turn off the lights and be so quiet. He was so busy turning that he didn't know how many alleys he had turned into. He looked at the address printed on the motel door, number 44, Vo Nan Street. Truong Di Quan froze for a few seconds. What kind of street name is that? Never mind, he was a horror novelist after all. How could this scare him? He turned on his phone to check. There was a traffic jam for a while, and it was almost 8 o'clock at night. Looking at this old 2-story motel, he gritted his teeth, got out of the car and ran inside. Seeing someone coming in, the old lady at the reception desk put on her reading glasses and smiled mechanically as she said, "Welcome to Chiu Han Inn." Suddenly, a thunderclap sounded outside, and an unusual flash of light appeared. Zhang Yijun saw the old woman's smile, which was extremely strange. The smile and cold voice were as if they had been pre-programmed into the puppet. This detail was so familiar, it appeared in his first horror novel. Chapter 2 Chiu Han Inn. Outside, the wind and rain were strong. If it was cold, it would be on his back. But he could clearly feel a cold wind blowing straight into his face. The old woman was about 70 years old, small and thin. Because she was so thin, from a distance, her arms looked like skeletons. Pushing up her glasses, hiding behind them were a pair of deep black eyes, the old lady said, "Young man, whether you rent a room or not, we're about to close. Closes at only 8 o'clock. Truong Di Quan didn't care too much because it was cold. He said, "Please give me a room. Maybe one with a window?" "Okay, give me your ID." As she spoke, the old lady took out a notebook and wrote down the information from the identification card that Zhang Yijun had given her. He never expected that there would be a motel like this in this bustling city, where the information of the residents was also written down by hand. After finishing writing, the old lady took the key and led Zhang Yijun to the room. Behind the reception desk, there was an old staircase that looked like it was about to grow moss. The two of them had to walk upstairs. There was no security guard or anyone else at the reception desk, but she was completely unconcerned with thieves. Zhang Yijun looked around to see if they had any cameras installed, but it seemed like there weren't any. The light gray walls were old and worn with time. This motel probably hadn't been renovated in a long time. "Young man, what are you doing? Hurry up and help." The old lady saw that Zhang Yijun was lingering around searching, so she turned around and urged him. Zhang Yijun nodded and quickly followed. But after a few steps, he felt someone following him. He turned around in surprise, and there was no one behind him, only the cold old stairs lying there. Zhang Yijun's room was on the first floor, a room with a small balcony of about 4 square meters, just enough to stand and look down at the street. Walking down the deserted hallway, he saw that there were about 10 rooms on both sides of the first floor, but only 3 of them were occupied. After receiving the room key, Zhang Yijun asked the old lady if there was a place to park his car, but she said no, but he could leave it on the street for the night. If he still wanted to stay there tomorrow morning, he would have to park his car somewhere else. Zhang Yijun went down and parked the car properly, then carried his suitcase and the miscellaneous bags he had bought in the afternoon. Even though he had used a special raincoat for cars, he was still heartbroken. His $150,000 was lying on the street, and if he lost a rear-view mirror tomorrow, he would be heartbroken to death. The rain outside was still pouring heavily. Zhang Yijun had nothing to eat besides lunch. Luckily, he had a habit of snacking, so he bought a few boxes. It seemed like he would have to eat snacks for dinner. The room wasn't too big and had basic furniture, including a bed, a wardrobe, and a table and 2 chairs. After Zhang Yijun finished showering, he sat cross-legged on the chair, turned on the computer, and worked while snacking. At 10 p.m., Lo Hai Thuong called. Truong Di Quan told her about the road closure, then added a few more trivial stories and hung up. After finishing, he opened the document file to review his first novel, which also had the exact same scene as the one he encountered in the motel lobby. Heavy rain and strong wind, the main character mistakenly rented a haunted hotel. The old lady standing at the reception desk had bony hands like a dried corpse, a cold voice, and a strange, mechanical smile. No way! Zhang Yijun swallowed. He must be thinking too much. But right now, the cell phone beside him seemed to be talking. Strange, he had turned it off just now. Zhang Yijun immediately realized something was wrong. At night when he worked, he would usually turn his phone off in airplane mode, even turning off the internet, to avoid being startled by being too focused. Hesitantly reaching out to turn on his phone, he discovered that he had accidentally pressed the music button. It seemed that he had thought too much. He turned off the music and went to the bathroom to wash his face to wake up. But what surprised him was, when he came out, the phone was still playing music. A chill ran down his spine. It was very normal for motels like this to have unclean things. Without touching his phone, he took the computer to his bed, then searched online for Chiuhan Motel. The search results were long, but none of them were relevant. He was about to click exit when he accidentally saw a link from Facebook. The title was Discussing Ghost Stories at Chiuhan Motel. Clicking on the Facebook link, he requested to join. Less than a minute later, the request was approved. The address and sign on the group cover matched this place. Zhang Yijun quietly scrolled down to see the content. Pinned to the top of the group by the administrator was a post summarizing 9 typical ghost cases. But when he clicked on it, only 3 cases were recorded. The first case was on the 7th of January. The victim was a 25-year-old woman who worked as a waitress at a beer house and returned to her room at 12:30 in the morning. She was walking down the hallway on the 2nd floor and saw a figure in white pulling a rope towards the railing. She was afraid that someone was having an unnatural thought in the middle of the night, so she followed him. As a result, the figure disappeared as soon as she reached the last room. Coincidentally, the door to the last room was ajar. That night, the wind was strong, and no one had closed the balcony door. The wind blew against the door, making a creaking sound, shaking the door. She thought it must be the person pulling the rope, so she slowly pushed the door open. But the horror struck. As soon as the door opened, the room was filled with blood. The white shadow that had pulled the rope earlier was hanging from the ceiling. Blood was pouring down. The night light in the room was dim. She saw that the blood had already turned the white clothes red. Then the blood poured down to the floor, rising like a flood. She wanted to turn around and run, but at this moment the hanged man suddenly broke free from the rope and fell to the ground, then struggled to swim through the sea of blood and grabbed her leg. The other hand was full of bones like a long-dead corpse. The face was full of wounds. Maggots were crawling out. Then her scream woke up everyone on that floor. When they came out, they saw that she had fallen and hit her head on the wall. She was taken to the hospital, and the doctor had to give her more than 10 stitches. She had told many people that she had seen ghosts, but no one believed her. Because she had a very high alcohol concentration in her system, the doctor thought that she had hallucinated while drunk. There would have been nothing to talk about if she hadn't pulled the rope in the hospital corridor in the middle of the night 3 days later. She pulled it 3 nights in a row, wearing a white patient's gown with long, striped hair, scaring the living room of several people on the same floor. On the 4th night, she hooked the rope to the railing and hung herself. Luckily, the night guard saw her, but because she failed to save the person, she fell from the 1st floor of the hospital to the ground, resulting in paralysis of both legs. But ironically, no one believed what she said. They all said that she hanged herself because of a broken heart, but in fact she never had a boyfriend. Later, a journalist came to interview her. She gave him a piano key, saying that it was something she picked up outside that room's door. The line spacing was made up of skull icons, and when it came to the 2nd case, suddenly someone knocked on the door. Zhang Yijun cautiously took out the nunchaku from his suitcase and opened the door. If it was a murderer or something, he could probably handle it well, but if he encountered uninvited guests, he didn't know what to do. Turning the doorknob, he saw the old lady. She was carrying a bowl of hot noodles on a tray along with a cup of hot tea. Seeing Truong Di Quan, she smiled mechanically again and said, "I guess you're hungry. Don't worry, this is a complimentary food, free of charge." Grandchildren? Zhang Yijun wanted to say no, but in the end he couldn't resist. Even if the snacks were delicious, there was nothing better than eating hot noodles in this cold and rainy weather. He smiled and said, "Thank you." The old lady handed the tray of noodles to Zhang Yijun and turned away. Looking at her walking down the deserted hallway, Zhang Yijun couldn't help but think about the incident he had just finished reading. In a flash, She had reached the stairs and turned her head to look back. The hallway light wasn't too bright, but he could still see her. She still had that mechanical smile on her face, but he felt her mouth was wider than usual. He closed the door with his foot, and suddenly his back turned cold. Zhang Yijun remembered that there were still guests visiting. He placed the tray of noodles on the table. His cell phone was still playing some strange song. The temperature in the room was 24 degrees. It shouldn't be this cold. The cold wind blew straight into his back, bringing with it a damp feeling. Zhang Yijun turned his head to look. The balcony door was clearly closed tightly, but now it was opened one wing. The rain and wind continued to blow in. He went out and pulled the door closed. How the hell did the door get stuck in his hand? He frowned, looking at the thunder and lightning outside. At this moment, he didn't know what possessed him to turn his head and look inside the room. The second thunder and lightning sounded. Black light entered the room. Zhuang Diquan clearly saw a figure appear on the chair opposite his. As soon as the thunder passed, the figure disappeared. Zhang Yijun wrote horror stories, so of course he wouldn't be afraid of ghosts. He had encountered them many times before, and by chance. But now he was indeed a little scared, because this motel didn't feel normal at all. The windows were closed, the curtains were drawn, and only the dim light of the night light remained inside. Zhang Yijun turned on the two large lights, and the room gradually became warm. But when he went to the table, he found that the bowl of noodles and the cup of tea that were still hot a few minutes ago were now cold. Zhang Yijun placed the tray of noodles next to the door, then went to bed and started writing the first chapter of his new work. He thought it would be peaceful, but no, he was very wrong. He had no idea that the guests here would welcome him so warmly. At midnight, there was a knock on the door. Zhang Yijun, accustomed to holding a nunchaku, pressed his ear to the door to see if it was his door. But no, the knocking was coming from the other rooms. The knocking was very strange. Every 2 knocks would be interrupted for a few seconds, then 2 more knocks. Curiosity would kill the cat, and tonight, it seemed that Zhang Yijun had decided to spend the night playing a thrilling game. Gently pushing the door open, just enough to see half an eye, he looked out into the empty hallway to find the location of the knocking. Finally, he saw a black shadow standing in front of the room on the opposite side, close to the stairs. Because the stairs after going up to the first floor would continue to go up to the second floor. The black shadow continued to knock on the door. After 2 more rounds, the door finally opened. Chapter 3. The first case. Wait, the room he went to last night was originally empty, so why was the door opened from the inside? Zhang Yijun took a deep breath, trying to stay quiet. The black figure was clearly wearing black clothes, and a hooded cloak covered his head. He looked very relaxed, but in fact, he was trying to keep an eye on the surrounding movements. However, because the distance was too far, he couldn't see Zhang Yijun. The person was carrying something in his hand that couldn't be seen clearly. As soon as the door opened, he slipped inside. This action was clearly not like a ghost at all. That person must be a living person, but what was with that inexplicable action? There was nothing to be curious about. These things would only bring trouble. Zhang Yijun went back into his room and climbed into bed. He would definitely leave this place by tomorrow morning. Perhaps because of many things happening last night, Zhuang Diquan slept until 10 a.m. When he woke up, he saw several work emails from the editor along with 2 missed calls from Lu Haithuang. He called back. Lu Haithuang seemed quite curious about this motel. After being asked about his experience, Zhuang Diquan only said 2 words. Wonderful. Still remembering the group from last night, he turned on his computer to search. But strangely enough, this morning the group had disappeared without a trace. Oh, this life! Zhang Yijun got out of bed and pushed open the balcony door to let the sunlight in. But the sunlight couldn't reach him. His room's feng shui was really bad. People were coming and going on both sides of the street, and birds were also perching on other people's balconies, chirping loudly, but this one obviously had nothing. He looked around and found that the opposite room had a room with an identical balcony. He had seen it last night. His room was number 9, and the room opposite was number 10. This first floor has 3 occupied rooms. He is the 4th. The other 3 rooms are number 4, 7. His room is number 9. The remaining room is not remembered. 4, 7, 9. These 3 numbers are bad numbers. Many countries are suspicious and consider these numbers as bad omens. While he was deep in thought, Zhang Yijun heard a creaking sound. It turned out that the balcony door on the other side was being blown by the wind, making a creaking sound. But it was obvious that there was no One in that room, so why was the balcony door open? Zhang Yijuan tried to cover up his thoughts with an answer. It was the innkeeper who opened the door to ventilate. That was true, everyone did that. But when he turned his back to the house, he suddenly saw a figure appear inside the door. When he looked back, the door was empty, with nothing but the door being pushed open by the wind, making a strange creaking sound. From last night until now, when he first set foot here, he always felt like someone was staring at him. Truong Di Quan went into the bathroom to take a shower. He seriously thought about whether this motel could give him ideas for writing. After taking a shower, he decided to stay a few more days to see what happened. First, he had to find a place to park his car. Going down to the lobby, he saw the old lady sitting there for a while, so he remembered that he had not returned the bowl of noodles. He forced a smile, but the old lady only gave him a mechanical smile in return. Every time he saw this smile from her, he felt a chill. This street was very busy during the day, but he did not understand why it was so deserted at night. His BMW i8 attracted everyone's attention. He quickly got in the car and drove away. City H has an erratic rain and sun. Last night, it was still raining and windy, but this morning, the harsh sunlight of 34 degrees was rising. It felt like the sunlight could penetrate the car windows. I don't know where the city's publishing house heard the news from, but he just arrived yesterday. They contacted him today. The content was only about his publishing this year. With his 7 consecutive years of topping the book sales charts, they didn't need to suspect anything. Zhang Yijuan stopped at a sandwich cart on the side of the road, bought a loaf, ate it while driving, and conveniently called his manager to see if he could arrange to go to City H. As soon as he hung up, Lu Hai Thuong called. She told him to go to the crime scene on Tan Kai Street. She sent him the location, and he immediately drove there. The distance wasn't too far. About 10 minutes later, Tan Kai Street has a high-end villa area. As soon as you turn in, you see a police cordon. There are many reporters and police working. Lu Hai Thuong stood outside with her camera in hand to welcome Truong Di Quan. As soon as she got out of the car, she told the story at length. Around 1 o'clock last night, an uncle was walking his dog late at night. Because it had just stopped raining, when he passed by here, he discovered a terrible thing. A headless corpse was hanging from a rope attached to that tree. Wait, Truong Di Quan interrupted Lu Hai Thuong. If you don't have a head, how do you hang yourself? You don't know. There was a case like this 2 years ago. The victim died in the same condition. The police investigated for a long time, but still couldn't find the murderer or the victim's head. Lu Hai Thuong said while raising the camera to take pictures. Truong Di Quan said, "So you guys think that the culprit of this case is the culprit of that case?" Lu Hai Thuong nodded, then handed the camera to Truong Di Quan. "Look what I captured?" Truong Di Quan tilted his head to look. In the photo that Lu Hai Thuong took, besides the policeman working, there was an uninvited guest. It was a white shadow. Because of its disheveled hair, its face could not be seen clearly. That shadow was standing against a tree, holding a human head in its hand. Zhang Yijuan snatched the camera and turned it over and over to examine it. This was a strange-looking camera, as small as a smartphone with a large screen. This type of camera seemed very modern, but was rarely seen on the market. He couldn't believe this could happen. Could the camera take pictures of ghosts? Lu Hai Thuong, what exactly does your editorial office specialize in? Truong Di Quan asked. In fact, he had never read the magazine of the editorial office that Lu Hai Thuong worked for. He only knew that it was an editorial office that dealt with supernatural cases. But to do it to this level of professionalism was a bit surprising. The difference between novels and newspapers was that novels were fiction, to satisfy the reader's imagination. But newspapers were different. They reported news that was close to reality. If their editorial office really published photos like this, wouldn't they be promoting ghosts? Lu Hai Thuong was a bit angry as he snatched the camera back and said, "We work on spiritual and supernatural issues. Don't you see, this proves to be a murder case caused by a demon. That's why the police couldn't find the culprit." Hai Thuong, you are too superstitious. If you post news like this, you are helping the criminal. Zhang Yijuan really disagrees. Even though he is a horror author, his works always have detective elements. He believes that the presence of demons always originates from humans. No matter how terrifying the human heart is, sometimes deep in their minds, desire, jealousy, and envy are even more terrifying than demons. Forget it. I called you here with good intentions to find the documents, but if you don't need them, then forget it. I've already taken the photos I need. I have to quickly return to the editorial office to write the article. Lu Hai Thuong walked quickly in her 9-centimeter high heels. This girl was really strange. She was clearly going to work outside, but she was wearing an extremely uncomfortable office outfit and high heels. Truong Di Quan looked at her back. She was clearly a department head, but she was holding a camera and running to the scene to work. This was really strange. They hadn't seen each other for a long time, and last time he hadn't noticed what she was driving. This time, Zhang Yijun noticed that she was driving a Ferrari 812 that was more expensive than his car. With his income, buying a car like that wasn't a problem. But let's calculate her salary. Let's say her average annual income was $30,000. So after 5 years, it would be $150,000. Not counting living expenses, with that salary, she would have to work for 15 years to be able to afford that car. They were from the same hometown. Lu Hai Thuong's family was not as well off as Truong Di Quan's. It was obvious that she couldn't ask her family for money. So what exactly was her job? The camera could take pictures of ghosts. This made Truong Di Quan really worried. Just as Zhang Yijun was about to get in the car and leave, a man walked over from afar. The man was around 40 years old, wearing a white shirt and glasses, looking like an intellectual. From afar, he had a friendly smile on his face, and when the distance between the two of them was only 1 meter, he extended his hand and said, "Writer Zhang Yijun, I didn't expect to meet you here." Zhang Yijun was very sociable. Just as he was about to reach out, another hand from behind his back reached out to shake the other man's hand. The black shirt sleeves were neatly rolled up at the elbows, revealing slender, fair arms. The person said, "Hello, I'm his manager. If you need anything, just contact me. It's not convenient for him to meet outsiders." The man's expression changed slightly. He asked, "What's your name?" "My name is No Hai Sin." The name and voice were so familiar, Truong Di Quan turned his head to look. No Hai Sin still had a benevolent smile on his lips. His style was unchanged, black shirt and pants, sneakers, trendy hair and glasses. He looked more like an artist than a manager. No Hai Sin nodded at Truong Di Quan and then took out his business card and gave it to the man opposite. He took it, but didn't even look at the business card or the person who gave it to him. He just stared at Truong Di Quan and said, "I'm a big fan of yours. I buy a lot of your works to support you. Thank you for your support. It is such an honor." Zhang Yijun had never had a fake smile. He didn't have celebrity disease. It was as if he always used the most gentle eyes to look at this world. The man's eyes narrowed into a genuine smile. He said, "My name is Bui the Phuong. I am a criminal psychology consultant at the City Police Department. If we have the chance to meet, can I invite you two to a meal?" Zhang Yijun shook his head and said, "No need. You are working. We won't bother you anymore. You have his business card. Just contact him when you have time." "Okay. Here's my business card. You two take your time." Bui the Phuong was very tactful. He bowed and gave No Hai Sin his business card, then turned and walked into the scene. He did not seem like an arrogant person, but from beginning to end, he did not look at No Hai Sin. Normally, there were only two types of people who did not dare to look at No Hai Sin. One was a demon, the other was a criminal. Chapter 4, The Ghost Bride. "When did you arrive? Where is your car?" Truong Di Quan smiled at No Hai Sin and opened the car door. No Hai Sin walked around to the passenger seat and sat down. He said, "I just arrived this morning. The car is at the hotel." Truong Di Quan did not ask how No Hai Sin found him. Because No Hai Sin's movements were very unusual, he could know everything he wanted to know. "Are you hungry? Let's go eat." Zhang Yijun asked as he drove. Wu Huaixing shook his head and said, "Not hungry." "Yijun, did you notice that man just now? He said he was a criminal psychology consultant, but why did he appear at the scene?" "He came to see the scene, so it's not unreasonable to speculate about the perpetrator's mentality." "Did you find anything? Do you remember, I once said that in this world there are two types of people who don't dare look straight at me?" Zhang Yijun nodded. He discovered the problem very quickly, but then said, "You are too suspicious. A criminal psychologist would kill someone, and besides, his face looks very honest and kind, I think." "It is impossible." "I hope so. We're not the police anyway, so don't worry about it. You go eat, just drop me off in front." Because the nature of the case was extremely brutal, and it was identical to the case that happened 2 years ago, the newspapers and TV channels were all reporting it. Many hypotheses were put forward. One side said that this was a murder case with a sequence and method similar to a ritual of some religious organization. The other side said that this was just a coincidence, or that the current murderer was imitating the murderer's method from 2 years ago. They said that this was most likely a fan of the murderer. In general, the comments below the newspapers were very lively, but no matter what the reason for the murder, the people were extremely afraid. In the middle of a big city, with cameras installed on the streets, someone dared to kill someone in such a cruel way. The cameras did not record any traces. This made Truong Di Quan think of the photo that Lo Hai Thuong took. But he quickly dismissed that meaning. In all aspects, he did not think that ghosts could do such a thing. However, that was only within his understanding. No one knew what was deeper. Everywhere was talking about that case. Truong Di Quan went to eat his fill, and when he returned to the motel, he still heard the residents in that area whispering and gossiping. The surrounding area of Vo Nan Street was also very bustling. Only Chiuhan Motel seemed to lie quietly isolated from the outside. Truong Di Quan walked in. The old lady was still sitting at the counter, still looking at him with that mechanical smile. He walked in and politely asked the old lady, "Excuse me, can we register for a monthly stay here?" The old lady replied mechanically, "Yes. The people who stay here are all monthly residents. Your room fee is 250,000 a day. If you stay for a month, I will give you a 20% discount. But I have to tell you in advance, you are not allowed to go out after 8 o'clock. Because I will close the door at 8 o'clock. Why do you close so early? This road is not safe at night, especially after 8 p.m. You absolutely should not go out." Hearing the old lady speak, Zhang Yijuan remembered. The distance from Warren Road to this place was about 5 kilometers. The end of the road seemed to be very far away. Truong Di Quan nodded. If the guests here all stayed for a month, and were not allowed to go out after 8 o'clock, then what about the guest in black last night? He suddenly left and went upstairs, leaving the old lady stunned. As soon as he got to his room, he threw himself into work, not having time to worry about anything else. Just like that, time passed by without him noticing. By the time his stomach was rumbling, it was already 6 p.m. Thinking about the fact that the store closed at 8 p.m. made him quickly rush down the street to eat. Even in the restaurant, news of the case could not be avoided. There were autopsy results, accounts from family members, neighbors, and the man walking his dog. There was. Truong Di Quan stopped eating, looked up at the screen. Bui the Phuong appeared on it. He was analyzing the psychology of criminals, talking about a long story about a professional issue that the listener did not understand. Although Zhang Yijuan had never taken any criminal psychology courses, he had studied many books. Therefore, he felt that Bui the Phuong's level of expertise was quite high. The way he presented the results of his analysis was extremely convincing. After listening, the people in the restaurant clapped their hands, unable to hide their admiration for Bui the Phuong. At 9 p.m., Zhang Yijuan went on Facebook to search for the discussion group from last night. The results came up, and his palms were sweaty. The group was still there, intact, as if it had never disappeared. He clicked on the group, and the pinned post was still there. He scrolled down and read the second case. The second case was as follows. On February 4th, a 30-year-old man who worked as a musician at a bar returned to his room at 2:50 a.m. His room was also on the second floor. When he got to his room, he found that the door was ajar. It was dark and cold inside, and he could hear the shrill cries of a child. Because he had a little bit of alcohol in him, he thought he had gone to the wrong room. But when he checked again, it was clear that this was his room. Just as he was about to go down to find the landlady, a cold hand reached out from inside the room and grabbed his ankle and pulled him in. No one knows what happened in that room, because after they found him, he had gouged out his own eyes and used a knife to cut off his tongue. The doctor finally said that because the alcohol he drank contained crystal meth, he probably had hallucinated and abused himself. The above is a police officer who came to the scene and found writing on a piece of paper covered in blood. After checking, it was his handwriting. Zhang Yijuan unscrewed the cap of the mineral water bottle, and before he could drink it, there was another knock on the door. The familiar nunchaku in hand opened the door. It turned out to be the old lady who owned the motel. She said, "You still haven't returned that tray to me." Only then did Zhang Yijuan remember that he hadn't noticed it, because he had left it out of sight. He was about to pick it up and return it to the old lady when he suddenly froze. The bowl of noodles and the cup of tea, which he had clearly not touched with chopsticks last night, were now unusually clean, with only a little bit of noodle water left. Sweat began to form on his forehead, and he suspected that it wasn't a ghost, but rather some pervert who was loitering around this motel, and of course, that old lady was no exception. Returning the tray to the old lady in a trembling state, Zhang Yijun quickly closed the door, then searched the room to see if anyone was there. It started to rain heavily outside again. The weather forecast said that H City would continue to have continuous night rain for several more days. This time, he had to close the balcony door. Zhang Yijun went back to bed to read the third case, but the computer lagged for a few seconds and then returned to the main screen. At this moment, some publishers bothered him again. The conversation lasted for a long time, until he ended it and found that it was already midnight. The news section had a huge headline, Night Bulletin. Ghostly reports of headless hanging case. It was already there. How could he stop his curiosity? Truong Diquan clicked to see. There were several photos of ghosts posted outside, and he recognized one of them was taken by Lu Hai Thuong. The article was a general introduction, but it was highly promotional, mainly to arouse the curiosity of readers to join the discussion group below the article. To join that discussion group, the person had to pay a fee of 200,000. What kind of multi-level marketing is this? In less than 5 minutes, the group's membership had reached 5,000 people. Human curiosity about ghosts is really too high. Is it really possible to take pictures of ghosts? Zhang Yijun hesitated, wanting to go in and see what's really inside. In modern times, with just one click, one can transfer money to join a group. Pinned above the group was a blurry video that looked like it was recorded by a camera. The time was 12:30, the rain had just stopped. The victim opened the gate from inside the house and was grabbed by a strange white shadow. Looking closely, the white shadow seemed to have no legs and was flying on the ground. A rope was hanging from a tree branch. At this time the camera could only capture the ghostly back. When it turned around, it saw the victim's head in its hand. Because it was dark, the street light was weak and pale yellow, so it was impossible to see clearly whether the shadow was present or not. Time seemed to stop, the shadow didn't move, until it suddenly turned its face straight to the screen. The phone rang, startling Truong Diquan. That's why he rarely left his phone on at night, but tonight he forgot to turn it off. Accidentally turning off the computer, Truong Diquan picked up the phone to see. It was No Ha Sin calling. Diquan, did you see that ghost article? Wu Huixing's voice was especially soothing at night. Zhang Yijun breathed heavily and said, I just went into the group to watch the recording. It was getting intense when you called. I almost had a heart attack and died. Do you think this was posted by Lu Hai Thuong and his group? Why did No Ha Sin know Lu Hai Thuong, did he find out something? Truong Diquan wanted to argue, but he remembered Lu Hai Thuong's splendor and kept quiet. No Ha Sin said something else, but he couldn't hear clearly, because the noise that sounded like it was coming from outside the balcony attracted him. Power outage. It was pitch black all around, and No Ha Sin on the other end of the line seemed to notice something was wrong. He asked worriedly, Truong Diquan, what happened? Truong Diquan, quickly send me your location. Zhang Yijun turned off his phone and turned on the flashlight. The surroundings were now plunged into endless darkness. The atmosphere was already eerie, but now it was even more eerie. Zhang Yijun had not decided what to do yet. When the power went out, we could hear sounds that we normally couldn't hear. Footsteps or the sound of a clock, or maybe a few night owls. But no, the space was strangely quiet. It was now 12:15. From that strangely quiet space came the sound of firecrackers exploding from afar, getting closer. Strange, hadn't the government banned firecrackers? Why were they set off at a time like this? But right after that, he heard the sound of chattering and laughter. It sounded like there were many people walking on the street. Trumpets, firecrackers, doesn't this sound like an ancient wedding? In your first novel, there was a ghost wedding, set in ancient times, with trumpets and firecrackers. Was this a dream or not? But Zhang Yijun was afraid of the pain, and had no intention of pinching himself. He turned off the light from his phone, silently reciting scriptures to calm himself down, and walked towards the balcony. The noisy noise was getting closer and closer. He lifted the curtain with his hand, and it turned out that the row of houses across the street had not been cut off. The streetlights on one side could not light up the entire street. The rain had stopped, and a wedding procession appeared on the deserted street. The devil gets married. They were dressed in colorful clothes, but he could clearly see that they were made of paper from a votive paper shop. Their limbs were white, Their faces were strange, and their lips were red beyond measure. However, there was one strange thing. They could not fly above the ground, they could only walk. Only they walked mechanically. Chapter 5, The Midnight Newspaper. Ghost in the Shell, upgraded version? Zhang Yijun muttered. He had studied this genre before. 3 years ago, he had read an article online. The writer used the pen name of the sorcerer Lin Chu. He wrote that he had witnessed a ghost entering a wedding in an ancient tomb. He said that at that time, it was controlled by a high-level ghost that caused such a phenomenon to occur. But could it happen in the middle of a city like this? Although it was already late, this was the city that never slept. 5 kilometers away, there were still people coming and going, who would dare to risk their lives like this. Zhang Yijun didn't care about the bride and groom, he was only concerned with counting. That formation had about 20 people. To make 20 corpses walk unconsciously, how high level was that person's spiritual power? He pulled down the curtains and called Wu Huixing. Wu Huixing, I think I just saw a ghost getting married, but this is the ghost-possessed version. Do you remember? I once said I read the story of the shaman Lin Chu about a ghost getting married in a grave. Zhang Yijun spoke a long story, and the palace was brightly lit again. And he heard the trumpet sound disappear in the distance. Then he got into bed, covered himself with the blanket, and enthusiastically told Wu Huixing the whole story. Another night passed heavily. Although he had many ideas, Truong Di Quan felt tired both physically and mentally. Waking up early in the morning, he tried to open the balcony door to see if he could see any morning sunlight. But unfortunately, it was still the same. The sun seemed to avoid the feng shui of this house. Dejectedly, he returned and saw a figure standing by the door of the balcony of the other room. The distance was not too far, but he could not clearly see whether it was a man or a woman. Truong Di Quan had made an appointment with Lo Hai Thuong to ask about the newspaper article last night. After going down to the lobby, he conveniently asked the innkeeper, "May I ask if there is anyone staying in room number 10 across from mine?" Zhang Yijun really didn't think much of it. He knew there were 3 occupied rooms, but he only remembered 2. But when he went in and out, he kept forgetting to look at the room across from him. The old lady pushed up her reading glasses and said, "No, there are only 4 occupied rooms on your floor. They are rooms 0, 4, 7, 9. The room across from you is number 10, and it's empty." If there was no one there, then who was the figure he saw these past 2 days? Could it be? A chill ran down his spine again. He wanted to tell the old lady, but he felt that this old lady was even more strange. He walked to a nearby apartment building to get his car, then went to the meeting place with Lo Hai Thuong. As soon as he sat down, Lo Hai Thuong immediately said, "I thought you didn't believe in ghosts. I didn't expect you to spend money to join that discussion group." As soon as Lo Hai Thuong finished speaking, he showed Truong Di Quan his phone. The group was in secret mode, and the number of members reached 20,000. 4 billion. In one night, they were able to earn 4 billion. You guys really did it. That video is a product of Photoshop, right? You guys are deceiving, leading people by the nose, and making money illegally. If you get sued, you will suffer a lot. Truong Di Quan just didn't expect Lo Hai Thuong to be so straightforward. But Lo Hai Thuong wasn't angry at all. She just said, "Di Quan, don't make a big deal out of it, okay? We make money just like you. Our editorial office only publishes normal supernatural things during the day. Only at night do we open a ghost show to give the audience a slightly new experience." What about that article? Zhang Yijun checked his phone as he spoke. Strangely, the article had disappeared. However, the side information was still dense, and someone had even taken a screenshot of the article. Lu Hai Thuong leaned back in his chair and waved his hand, saying, "You see, that's a late-night newspaper. The news only starts at midnight and ends half an hour later. The poster's nickname is De Kui. The source ID is not real. You guys can do this much for money. I'm speechless. Yijun, not everyone has a smooth life. Like you. Even without going to college, you can still be successful like today. Earning several $1,000,000 a year, spending money like water without thinking. There are many people in this world who are in difficult circumstances. You don't know what they have been through. Because you are my friend, I am telling you. We earn money properly. As long as no one bothers us, we won't touch them." Truong Di Quan sat there in a daze for a long time, even though Lu Hai Thuong had already left. He began to think about whether what he did was right or not. After all, he was just an ordinary person, and he just needed to live his life. Lu Hai Thuong and his group weren't really wrong. They didn't force anyone or harm anyone. Just mind your own business. Truong Di Quan was about to stand up when a hand grabbed his shoulder. That person almost got hit by a nunchaku. Luckily that person was No Hai Sin with good skills. No Hai Sin, just kill me. Why do you always wait for the right time to appear? Although his words sounded angry, Truong Di Quan's attitude was very cheerful. Then he continued with interest. How about this, you come live with me? I haven't slept well alone for the past few nights. Living with you? You can rent me another room. No Hai Sin bargained. Truong Di Quan frowned and said, So what's the difference, but it's fine. You go get your luggage, come stay tonight. I don't lack money, so don't even try to tempt me. No Hai Sin refused. He might have been a penniless man before, but after Fan Vin disappeared in the Devil City, he left him some assets. Although he had no need to use them, he still felt that Fan Vin was paying him back. Previously, the money Fan Vin had personally owned was all earned by his help. Do you have any paper? Give me a piece of paper. Truong Di Quan looked at No Hai Sin suspiciously and took out a piece of paper from his pocket and gave it to him. No Hai Sin put it under the table. Less than a minute later, he gave the paper to Truong Di Quan and said, If you happen to encounter a ghost, keep this paper carefully, it can help you. No Hai Sin, you also know how to draw talismans? Truong Di Quan brought the paper up to his face to look at it, but the paper was blank and had nothing on it. Truong Di Quan returned home to rest at 7:30. Vonan Street was strangely deserted, as if it was isolated from the outside world at night. The basement of the apartment building where he parked his car automatically scanned license plates. The entire large basement was filled with cars, but there was not a single person in sight. Wandering on the street, the dim yellow street lights on both sides were as lonely as his footsteps. He always felt like someone was following him, but when he looked back, there was only a deserted area. There was not a single sound, but occasionally he saw a figure appear on the balcony. Hello! Truong Di Quan nodded to the old lady sitting at the counter, but she said, Welcome to Chiu Han Inn. Damn it! Zhang Yijuan dropped the bag in his hand on the ground. There was a loud crash. Zhang Yijuan bent down to pick it up and saw that the old lady had already walked in front of him. Muttering all sorts of things under his breath, he wished that when he looked up, the old lady would still be normal. Young man, how careless. Despite the cold, mechanical voice, she still seemed normal. Zhang Yijuan smiled bitterly and quickly rushed upstairs. Because he had the talisman that Wu Huixing had given him, he was a bit hesitant. Although he didn't know if it really worked, since Wu Huixing had given it to him, he didn't have the slightest doubt. He clearly remembered that there were only 10 rooms on the first floor, but the old lady said there was room number 0. Zhang Yijuan walked down the hallway and started looking at the numbers. The row to his right was 0, 3, 5, 7, 9. The row to his left was 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. No starting number. There is no beginning, no end. All this pain is just a vicious cycle, never ending. Zhang Yijuan kept his computer on to work as usual. Because the situation was a bit sensitive at the moment, he did not turn off his phone, but put it on silent mode. After 10 o'clock, there was a noise outside. Zhang Yijuan held the talisman and opened the door a little to look outside. Room number 7 was near his room. In front of the door was a couple or lovers arguing. Even though it was close by, he couldn't hear a word. The voices were too small or didn't make any sound. He could only see the mouth movements. The sound he heard was the cell phone falling and breaking on the ground. And it seemed like only he heard it, because the other 2 rooms were both closed and quiet. Oh well, it had nothing to do with him anyway. Truong Di Quan closed the door and went inside. But before the door was closed, he heard the girl's miserable scream. The man took a knife and stabbed the girl straight into her stomach. The girl fell to the ground in pain, holding her stomach, blood flowing out. But the man did not stop there. He continued to stab the girl in the back a few more times. This is a murder case after all. I saw it and couldn't just ignore it. Should I call the police or run out to stop it? Still should call the police. Truong Di Quan ran to bed to get the phone to call the police, but it was out of coverage area. But clearly the phone still had signal, but just couldn't call the police. He had doubted what he saw, but seeing the girl in pain was too real. He thought for a few seconds, and then ran down to the lobby to report to the innkeeper. Holding the nunchaku in his hand, he rushed out into the hallway. But because the hallway wasn't wide enough, the man noticed him. The man's face had a hostile expression as if Zhang Yijuan was holding a weapon to attack him. So without waiting for Zhang Yijuan to make a move, the man stabbed him in the stomach. Damn it! Stop being a hero. Truong Di Quan covered his wound with his hand, watching the blood flow down. But he didn't feel any pain at all. He leaned against the wall and shouted, "Murder!" After that sentence, he saw the guy holding a knife and continuously stabbing him more than 10 times. When Zhang Yijun woke up, he found himself lying in the hallway. His first reaction was to feel the wound on his stomach. After finding no wound, he sat up. The innkeeper seemed unhappy and said, "Young man, why are you standing outside someone else's room shouting and killing people in the middle of the night?" Obviously, Zhang Yijun found the couple who had killed each other standing in front of him. They looked very intimate, and the girl didn't have any injuries, so he kept his mouth shut. What was going on? It couldn't be an illusion. If it was an illusion, how could he see their faces so clearly? Zhang Yijun apologized solemnly and went back to his room. His whole body was in a daze, not understanding what had just happened. He lay down on the bed, intending to take out his phone to play around with it, but as soon as he turned on his phone, he had to sit up. He had just wanted to call the police, but the phone screen showed April 14th. Why was it April 13th now? Could it be you saw it coming? That guy will kill that girl tomorrow night. The long night had not yet ended. Zhang Yijun woke up, turned on the computer, searched for the discussion group that only appeared at midnight, and continued reading the third story. Under the skull divider, the third story began. The victim of the third story lived on the first floor, room number 10. It happened on March 4th and was a young girl. This story is even more thrilling than the other two, because she encountered a ghost in room number 9 and died in room number 10. "Oh my God, I met a ghost in the room I'm in." Zhang Yijun went to turn on the lights. After all, light would lessen people's fear. The victim was a high-ranking hotel manager. She came home at 12 midnight. At 1:30 a.m., she was still putting on her face mask when she heard a commotion in the room across the street. It was clear that room number 9 was empty at the time. Her starting point was the fear of a burglar breaking in. But when she walked out the door, she didn't know why there was a gravitational force pulling her to the door of room number 9. The door was half closed, and a song was playing from inside in the darkness. She still remembered that it was the very famous song Bak Kim Tang, that she often sang with her friends when she was young. The lyrics were very familiar, but the voice that came through was extremely terrifying. It was a group of children singing, their shrill voices carrying extreme sadness. It was like the sound of pain and suffering, struggling in hell. Northern Golden Staircase, Northern Golden Staircase. Holding her phone in her hand, she started filming. Because her other job was a YouTuber who specialized in horror videos. She had heard that this motel was rumored to be haunted, but she didn't expect to see it today. After filming for a while, she decided to push the door open and enter the room. In the cold, dark room, the singing voice came from all over the room, with no direction. She turned around and turned on her phone's light and started searching. Under the bed, the closet door, and finally the bathroom. Nothing unusual, the singing voice was still echoing. Until she shined the light on the bathroom mirror. It was obvious that no one was there, but the bathroom mirror was wet as if someone had just showered. She reached out to stroke the mirror, feeling the water stains moving and seeping into her palm. She was a little scared at this point, so she wanted to end the clip and go back out. But just as she pulled her hand away, a strange face appeared in the mirror. That was what the police found on the phone, that they came to the scene of the crime. However, they did not find any clips inside. The person who called the police was a person who lived in the house across the street. At 6 a.m., he went out to his balcony to exercise and saw the victim in white silk pajamas, hanging from a rope on the balcony of room number 10. After the police concluded that her death was a suicide by hanging, a week later the horrifying clip was circulated in a newspaper group at 12 midnight. The administrator said that when he joined the group, he copied the clip, and now it is posted in the comments section. Zhang Yijun wiped his cold sweat. He still didn't have the courage to watch the spooky clip filmed in the room he was in. He stared at the bathroom for a while, thinking that he definitely wouldn't go there tonight. He called Wu Huixing. "Look at what I sent over. This place is really unusual. I found articles about the incidents here." No Hai Sin on the other end of the line was silent, then only told Truong Di Quan to hold on to the talisman he gave him, and there would be no big problems. The talisman that No Hai Sin drew was a high-level talisman specifically used to deal with the spirit fox in the grave. Normal ghosts would run away when they saw it and wouldn't dare to come near it. Hanging up the phone, Zhang Yijun began to think about things related to this motel. There was one thing that was particularly troubling. The old man had clearly said that the motel would close at 8 o'clock, so why did those people only return to their rooms after midnight? It was also possible that after those incidents happened, the old lady decided to close the door at 8 p.m. Then he remembered the figure in black knocking on the door at 12 a.m. that night. That expression was clearly trying to scare someone, making others afraid to leave the room. Could those ghostly incidents be related to that person? And Lu Hai Thuong's editorial office. In any case, analyzing it like that made Zhang Yijun less afraid. He didn't dare to sleep, nor did he dare to write, but he did something extremely stupid, which was to open the balcony door at 2 a.m. Because of the tension, he forgot that the victim had died on the balcony next door. So when he looked around, a white shadow passed by his eyes from the other balcony. Zhang Yijun quickly closed the door and ran into the room, holding tightly onto Wu Huixing's talisman. Only now did he notice that the curtain seemed too thin, and at this moment it had started to rain outside, with thunder and lightning. Zhang Yijun ran into the bed, but his eyes kept looking in that direction. From the dark light outside, he saw a rope slowly hanging down from above. Thunder and lightning rang out, revealing a figure hanging from a noose on the rope. Zhang Yijun swallowed hard, his mouth continuously chanting scriptures. After the next thunder and lightning rang out, the figure and the rope disappeared. Zhang Yijun was shocked and slept soundly the next day. When he woke up, it was already 7:30 p.m. He could only eat snacks because the motel was about to close. Should he stay here tonight or go out? Curiosity killed Zhang Yijun. He really wanted to know what was going on. Because this matter was too stimulating and fascinating, if he witnessed it all, his writing would definitely be even more amazing in the future. Trying to stuff snacks into his mouth, these days were a game that tested his mental strength to the max. While eating deliciously, Trong Di Quan remembered the case last night. The time was tonight, so could it be that the murder really happened tonight? He stopped eating and called No Hai Sin, but after calling 10 times, there was still no answer. This No Hai Sin guy couldn't be dead, right? He wasn't normally like this. It was 9 o'clock now, last night it was past 10 o'clock. There was still more than an hour left. Should he tell them, or tell the motel owner to call the police? But if they didn't believe him, or if it really didn't happen, he would be taken to the police station for causing trouble. He didn't want to leave. A stain on his career anyway. Calmness makes a gentleman. Zhang Yijun calmed down. Zhang Yijun reassured himself like that, then sat upright on the bed and waited. Time passed slowly, and finally it was 10 o'clock. 10:05, 10:10, 10:15, there was a noise coming from outside the hallway. Zhang Yijun stuffed the amulet into his pocket, holding the phone in one hand and the nunchaku in the other. He opened the door slightly and looked outside. It was room number 7 next door. The two people had broken a phone on the floor and were currently arguing fiercely. Zhang Yijun saw the knife in the other guy's hand. In the blink of an eye, he had stabbed the girl in the stomach. The actions and circumstances were exactly the same as last night, making Zhang Yijun extremely frightened. He had to try very hard to be quiet. The noise was so loud that the people in the other 2 rooms had already come out. They were so frightened that they called the police. The other 2 rooms contained a young man and a middle-aged couple. Zhang Yijun still didn't want to go out, he just stood quietly in the room watching. The police arrived very quickly, as if they were just outside the street. The motel owner brought the police up when the girl was already lying motionless. Because the guy looked like a crazy murderer, no one dared to approach. Police here, put down your weapons. Call an ambulance. Despite the police pointing their guns at him, he only turned his head and walked towards Zhang Yijun with murderous intent. His cold, dark eyes seemed to want to devour him. The police chased after him, constantly warning him. But he was completely mad, even bringing the blade to his mouth to lick the blood off it. Zhang Yijun was a little moved. Before he closed the door tightly, he saw something blurry behind him. A ghost, perhaps. A loud noise rang out. The man outside angrily slammed the door, then resolutely pulled out a knife and stabbed himself in the stomach. The police arrived and subdued him, handcuffing him. Only when the ambulance siren blared loudly in the night did Zhang Yijun slowly open the door to look. The police and paramedics had left, leaving only 2 police officers standing guard at the scene. The police were clearly in uniform, but Zhang Yijun saw a white shadow enter the room from outside. The 3 people from the other 2 rooms had been invited by the police to the lobby to give statements, and Zhang Yijun closed the door and entered the room. But before he could lie down on the bed, a police officer knocked on the door. Hello, I am the police. We have some questions to ask. Would you please cooperate with us? Zhang Yijuan naturally couldn't refuse to cooperate. He took his phone and went down the hall with the police. When he passed by room number 7, he glanced in, and he was sure of one thing. There was a figure sitting on the bed inside. The police were here anyway, he should trust them, he asked the policeman. Excuse me, is there still anyone inside that room? No. My teammates are just securing the scene outside. As soon as the policeman finished speaking, Zhang Yijuan suddenly remembered the shadow behind the murderer. Could it be that that room belonged to him? At this time, No Hao Ai-sin had appeared on Vonan Street. He was dressed in black, just like a ghost. Vonan Street at night reminded him of Vin Tu Street in Kuitan. The ambulance had already left. Now there were only 2 dark police cars with their lights off, lying on the side of the road. He stopped in front of the motel door, looked up. Countless images that did not belong to this world entered his eyes. No Hao Ai-sin's face was expressionless. He just muttered, Chiyuhan Motel? Zhang Yijuan was already plotting out the story in his head, so the policeman's question downstairs didn't reach his ears. It wasn't until the policeman who brought him down loudly reminded him that he came to his senses. But at this moment, Wu Huixing appeared in front of the motel door, holding a cell phone in his hand, and said in a low voice, Comrade policeman, someone is looking for you. The police officer looked at Wu Huixing warily for a few seconds before answering the phone. He changed his expression and then said gently, He's been chatting with you all night, I see. Goodbye. After returning the phone to No Hao Ai-sin, the police officer nodded warmly and said to Trong Di Quan, I'm sorry, I hope. You understand, we are just doing our official duty. Chapter 6, The Tang Sect's Ghost Fate. No Hao Ai-sin, I thought you were dead. What did you do that I couldn't get through to you all night? As soon as he climbed the stairs, Zhang Yijuan started mumbling. Wu Huixing just said softly, Didn't I find a way to save you? Even though you have the amulet I gave you, if you have any problems with the police, you will still be taken away like usual. Aren't I just curious? You see, this case happened exactly like what I saw last night. Zhang Yijuan stopped talking because he and Wu Huixing were looking at room number 7, and Wu Huixing's expression was clearly very abnormal. Why is the Tang Mon devil here? Just passing by, Trong Di Quan asked. Hao Ai-sin, what did you just say? What is this ghost and death funeral? No Hao Ai-sin refused to answer. As soon as he entered the room, he turned off all the lights and checked around. Trong Di Quan was very curious, finally following No Hao Ai-sin into the bathroom. As soon as he pushed the door open, No Hao Ai-sin frowned, his eyes looking straight at the mirror hanging on the wall. Trong Di Quan remembered that clip. He was about to stop him when No Hao Ai-sin used something and hit the mirror. The sound echoed in the night, but it seemed that no one heard it, so when No Hao Ai-sin had hit the door for the 3rd time, no one came to knock on the door. No matter how sturdy the mirror was, with No Hao Ai-sin's strength and the nunchaku in his hand, it did not budge even a bit. What's wrong? You're destroying someone else's property. The police are outside. Get out of the way. No Hao Ai-sin reached out to remove Trong Di Quan's arm that was pulling him, pushed him away, and used his hand to draw on the mirror. After finishing drawing, he used force to hit the nunchaku again. The mirror shattered and fell to the ground, the broken pieces of mirror showing different strange images. One piece hit Trong Di Quan, causing his arm to be cut and bleeding profusely. Damn! No Hao Ai-sin turned to cover the wound with his hand, but at this moment Trong Di Quan looked behind him and said, Hao Ai-sin, behind you. On the broken mirror, there were thousands of tiny hands spreading out as if trying to grab No Hao Ai-sin. No Hao Ai-sin swung his nunchaku at it. Those tiny hands seemed to be crushed. They screamed in pain, then blood continuously flowed from inside and dripped onto the ground. Just a little mirror demon, and yet he dares to cause trouble here. No Hao Ai-sin continuously threw several talismans. Trong Di Quan opened his eyes wide and saw blood flowing back up from the ground. In just a moment, the blood seemed to have been sucked back up by the mirror, clean without any trace left. Zhang Yijuan retreated, wiping his sweat with his hand. Only then did he realize that the wound on his arm had healed. Wu Huixing used the water hose to spray the mirror, and then pulled Zhang Yijuan out. Zhang Yijuan was extremely surprised and asked with many questions, Wu Huixing, what kind of person are you? Just consider me a monk. Anyway, I saved your life tonight. If it weren't for my talisman, that guy would have stabbed you. Don't scare me, aren't there police there? Zhang Yijuan, don't deny it. If the police had stopped him, Why would he have stabbed himself in front of the police? You must know that there really are ghosts in this world, and that guy was led by a ghost tonight. That ghost made the two of them leave the room, because that room was its forbidden ground. Truong Di Quan remembered the other guy's murderous gaze and fell silent. No Ho Ai-sin asked, "You saw it too, right? Who is it?" "It is the Tang Sek Devil Fate." "What is the Tang Mon ghost?" "The Tang Men's ghost is a living person with the Tang Men's fate. After that person dies in resentment, resentment will surround him and gradually cultivate into a ghost. That's why it's called the Tang Men's ghost." Zhang Yiguo was speechless when he heard this. There was no such thing as a demon in the demon knowledge he had searched for. Or maybe it was because there were no specific records in books or the internet. So what is it doing here? Does it have some purpose? Then I will immediately move tomorrow. This place is too dangerous anyway. Zhang Yijun drank almost all of the water in his bottle and asked worriedly. Wu Huaixing shook his head and said, "Don't move, because you won't be able to move. If you were led here, then you must be related to them." "No Ho Ai-sin, don't scare me to death. What did I do that they're paying attention to me? Your fate is very special, I just don't know about fate. If you have time, go ask a great master to tell your fortune." "What the hell is this?" Truong Di Quan jumped out of bed, but No Ho Ai-sin chased after him and covered his mouth. "Shoo!" There were screams outside. No Ho Ai-sin quickly opened the door and ran out. But it seemed too late. The two policemen had fallen to the ground dead, and especially their heads had been taken off. "Ghost of Tang Sect!" No Ho Ai-sin retreated and closed the door before the police arrived. He dragged Truong Di Quan into the bathroom and punched him, then tore his shirt. When the police broke down the door because he didn't open after calling for a long time, they saw the two of them fighting in the bathroom. The police also watched Zhang Yijun being beaten, with their mouths agape, but at the same time they also ordered people to search. The second floor was empty, and the people on the first floor were still downstairs, so the police targeted them. The method was exactly the same as the hanging incident a few days ago. The victims were all headless. We should have thought of this. We thought that the Tang Men Devil would target Zhang Yijun, but we didn't expect that it wouldn't leave any of its prey behind. Killing someone was so easy, but it made the couple kill each other. It was obvious. It wanted to cause trouble for the two of them. "Please come with us. You two are currently suspects in the case." The police officers kindly invited the two of them. No Ho Ai-sin smiled benevolently and said, "Before arresting anyone, I advise you to have evidence. You have the right to search and compare fingerprints. We will all cooperate fully. Don't talk too much. Follow us to the police station and talk." As the police handcuffed Wu Huaixing and Zhang Yijun, a police car siren rang out in the quiet night. The siren stopped, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps going up the stairs. A man in plain clothes walked among the group of police. He was about 30 years old, had an ordinary build, and looked as ordinary as possible. As soon as he arrived, he walked towards this side and took out a business card and gave it to the police. "I'm Vu Truong Zhang. I'm here to bail them out." The policeman looked at the business card and then looked at the policeman with Vu Truong Zhang and said, "Are you the son of the chief?" "Yes, can I take you now?" Vu Truong Zhang had an attitude, just like a spoiled brat who relied on his parents all day long. Although the police officers at the scene didn't seem very happy, they had no choice but to grit their teeth and let him go. The three people in the police car left. Truong Di Quan was very curious and said, "How did you two know each other?" "Ngo Huaixing, it seems I underestimated you." No Ho Ai-sin refused to answer. Vu Truong Zhang was too lazy to say anything. He was really an arrogant and mean person. The car stopped before leaving Vo Nan Street. No Ho Ai-sin opened the car door, pulled Truong Di Quan down and walked back to Chiu Han Motel. "No Ho Ai-sin, are you crazy?" Even though he said that, Truong Di Quan still ran after No Ho Ai-sin. It was already past midnight. Vo Nan Street was quiet and cold to the point of being terrifying. He felt like he was in the belly of a giant monster, being squeezed so tightly that he could hardly breathe. Could this be the reason why the residents here did not go out at night? "Wait for me, slow down." Just as he was lost in thought, he was already far behind No Ho Ai-sin. It felt like everyone was staring at him, which gave Truong Di Quan the motivation to walk faster. Halfway through the journey, the two of them saw a few police cars slowly passing by. Strange, it was clear that two policemen were dead, but why did they leave so quickly? Could it be that they were afraid of something? Arresting people was just an excuse. They searched the whole house, but still couldn't find the heads of the 2 policemen or the murder weapon. That was not normal at all. Maybe they weren't afraid of ghosts, but rather of an extremely dangerous criminal hiding in the house, and the current force was too small. They're really all gone. How do we get in now? Climb up there. No Ho-ai-sin lifted his face up to the balcony. Truong Di Quan felt that this was an impossible action. There was absolutely no large tree around that could lead to the balcony. No Ho-ai-sin hugged Truong Di Quan's waist and climbed over the wall to the balcony. Truong Di Quan's face was ashen as he said, "No Ho-ai-sin, you're really out of your mind. Talking too much is useless, or I'll sew your mouth shut for you." Zhang Yijuan clenched his teeth and shook his head repeatedly to signal for silence. It turned out that there was a noise inside the room. It sounded like a group of children singing Back Kim Tang. Zhang Yijuan was speechless, trying to explain everything to Wu Huaixing. Wu Huaixing pulled him aside and glanced inside. Sure enough, the moment his eyes met, Wu Huaixing saw a strange face pressed against the door. Of course, under Wu Huaixing's violence, that pitiful door was kicked down. A large talisman flew straight into the room. The singing voice now only had a miserable groan. How could these trivial things scare No Ho-ai-sin? This was definitely not the Ghost Fate Tang sect. They were just a bunch of short-lived little devils. From the moment he arrived, he had seen them everywhere in this house. There were even people and humans living here, but he still didn't know what they were. Not only did the Tang Men Ghost sect not scare the little devil, it even appeared more human than anyone else. So in short, this is a ghost inn. Only humans can see this place and stay there. As for the normal people who stay here, there are usually 2 types. One is a person with a murderous fate, evil people, killing people surrounded by fate. The second type is like Truong Di Quan. Chapter 7, Breaking the Demon Barrier. So cool, this time I must write a character like you. Truong Di Quan kept talking nonsense, forgetting that there were little devils all around. No Ho-ai-sin beat up the little devils and said, "Stop talking nonsense, quickly take out that talisman." A little devil stretched out its tiny white arm and grabbed Zhang Yijuan's ankle. He squatted down and took out the talisman and stuck it on its hand. The little devil cried loudly and then disappeared. After one little devil was destroyed, 2 or 3 of its companions surrounded it. But Zhang Yijuan, even though he was facing several fierce-looking little devils, did not use the talisman and just let them tear him apart. No Ho-ai-sin threw a talisman this way. The little devils flew out and then fiercely crawled back in. It seemed that these little devils were a level higher than the current devil. With too much resentment, naturally they were stronger. Yet Truong Di Quan was completely unharmed, as if those little devils could not hurt him. No Ho-ai-sin, what is this? Why are there so many of them? Little devil died young. It is very possible that there was a bloodbath in this room before, after which these children's souls were imprisoned here. No Ho-ai-sin had no mercy towards living beings, so the little devils got beaten up quite a bit. However, they seemed to be unable to win. They kept disappearing and then resurrecting. Was it because of the battle that imprisoned them, or was it because of the help of the Tang Men devils? Run! No Ho-ai-sin lived a very simple life. If he couldn't beat them, he would run first and then think about it. Truong Di Quan hurriedly ran after them, but as soon as the 2 of them opened the door, they retreated back and slammed the door shut. It was even more crowded outside than inside, perhaps because no Ho-ai-sin had made a move, so they were especially eager to raise their heads. Zhang Yijuan was out of breath. This was the first time he had seen a ghost in his life. He felt less excited and more scared. Their expressions when they closed the door and went back in were extremely wonderful, but the ghosts outside did not dare to enter. The hallway ghosts were only in the hallway. It seemed like every place here had a master, and they did not dare to enter other territories. What to do? They are immortal. Zhang Yijuan wiped his sweat as he looked at the little devils who were circling around the room and singing the nursery rhyme Back Kim Tang. They didn't recognize No Ho-ai-sin because perhaps they died too young and hadn't had time to open their minds. Or perhaps the person who imprisoned them had intentionally made them lose their minds so that they could only focus on their duties. But what does this house mean? Why would they do this? And above all, who are they? Eliminate the spirit fox, because it was destroyed by Wu Changjiang. Then only the demon lord remains. He has disappeared from the demon city. There is a high possibility that he has escaped. Wu Changjiang also came to this city, so that possibility is even higher. No Ho-ai-sin said, "If we cannot destroy them, then the only way left is to subdue them." Subdue them? Are you serious? Have I ever lied to you? Wu Huaixing took the talisman and walked to the middle of the room, searching for the place where the little ghosts were being held. Zhang Yijuan waved the talisman around to scare the ghosts away, then followed Wu Huaixing. The room was filled with ghostly energy, extremely eerie. Wu Huaixing was still using the talisman to search. Wu Huaixing could draw many types of talismans, but he didn't know what to call them or how to use them. He only needed to think about it to be able to draw and use it, and he had no intention of finding out. While searching and fighting the ghosts, the little ghosts were also extremely provocative, constantly flying after them to cause trouble. No Hao Sin searched and searched for a while, and finally found it under the bed. No Hao Sin slowly lifted the bed sheet to go under the bed. Inside was dark and gloomy, filled with demonic energy. The little ghosts had also stopped provocative. They were gathering here, baring their fangs and claws, aiming at No Hao Sin. The shrill screams of the demons echoed eerily in the dark night, making Trong Di Quan not dare to open his eyes. He kept holding onto No Hao Sin's arm. The atmosphere was tense when out of nowhere a loud bang made Zhang Yijuan startled and fall onto Wu Huaixing. Wu Huaixing showed a look of disdain as he pushed his head away and turned around to look. Something had just collided with the balcony door. From the dim light of the street lamp, they saw something trying to climb up the door. Because the lighting was not good, and there was a thin curtain inside the glass door, the image was extremely vivid. It looked like a monster climbing up the door, and like a dancing demon. Zhang Yijuan stuttered as he watched. Huaisheng, what is that thing? Wu Huaixing frowned. He drew a talisman and placed it on the ground. The triangular talisman was glowing and clattering towards the door. After the talisman collided with the door, Wu Huaixing shook his head and said, "It's a living creature. What kind of living thing is that big in the city, a mutant?" "I just said living creatures, not living animals." "So that's zombies? Oh my god, are we filming an apocalypse movie?" Even though it was dark, Trong Di Quan still recognized a very special look in No Hao Sin's eyes, so he had to keep his mouth shut. No Hao Sin pulled Trong Di Quan towards the door. After the door opened, a cat jumped straight onto Trong Di Quan's head. I swear, Trong Di Quan's scream was even more savage than the little devil's, making them freeze for a few seconds. Luckily, No Hao Sin closed the door in time, otherwise he would have definitely woken up the whole neighborhood. Trong Di Quan struggled with the meowing black cat for a while before No Hao Sin grabbed him by the neck. It was a blue-eyed lynx. This gaze was so familiar. Wu Huaixing put the cat down on the ground. It stretched, then let out a loud meow. It was obvious that the sound of a cat meowing at night was scarier than ghosts. Looking at the cat slowly walking towards the bed, Zhang Yijuan asked, "What is it doing?" "It's not an ordinary cat. It's the son of the god of Trong Duong Mountain." Wu Huaixing recognized that it was Chun Chiyue's older sister. He just didn't know why she was still alive and had turned into a cat. She had clearly disappeared when she was blocking Chun Chiyue's attack in the Demon City. The two of them followed the spirit cat, and Wu Huaixing saw that each of its steps was filled with demonic energy, a type of demonic energy that had been cultivated properly. The cat walked to the bed, and suddenly raised its head to the ceiling and let out a long, loud meow. It was unknown what kind of communication or ritual it was, but it suddenly turned its head to look at Wu Huaixing. Wu Huaixing frowned as he looked at the ceiling, and he was slightly startled. Zhang Yijuan had slept on this bed for several nights without losing his soul, and he had not even weakened a bit. His cultivation level in his previous life had indeed reached a certain point, so these things could not harm him. "Get out of the way!" Lin Mu had already retreated, and No Hao Sin also reminded Trong Di Quan to avoid it. He looked up at the ceiling once more, then drew a talisman and threw it at the intended location. The little devils, because Lin Mu was controlling them, did not dare to disturb No Hao Sin. After the talisman was cast, the wall suddenly showed signs of cracking, and then a cracking sound was heard. It seemed that it was still not enough, so No Hao Sin drew another talisman. This time, it was the ground's turn to shake, as if a strong suction force was coming from underground. No Hao Sin jumped onto the shaking bed, biting his finger and dripping blood. But his blood flowed too slowly, so he picked up a piece of broken wall, cut his palm, and dripped blood around it. The suction force on the ground gradually slowed down. Now it seemed like it was being summoned back up. Wu Huaixing's blood could attract demons. Zhang Yijuan felt heartbroken when he saw Wu Huaixing shed blood like that. But Wu Huaixing was using it freely, as if it was someone else's blood and not his own. The ground slowly calmed down, but then it felt like a huge animal was digging up the ground. The heavy demonic aura, the stench of fresh blood mixed with the faint scent of No Hao Sin's white blood. It was truly a mess. No Hao Sin drew another talisman and threw it on the ground. Lin Mu jumped over and started sniffing it with his nose. The lynx meowed, and Wu Huaixing quickly followed the direction it pointed and looked straight up at the ceiling, drawing a talisman with his blood. Right above the spot he drew, a triangular yellow-white array appeared. The creaking sound like a heavy chain will suddenly couldn't withstand Wu Huaixing's talisman, and it made a ding sound before shattering. After that crashing sound, the ground under the bed was gradually cracking. No Hao Sin jumped down, then decisively threw the poor bed against the wall. In the middle of the bed where the triangle formation was shining straight down, a deadly black light was shining. The Lin Mu jumped and clung to No Hao Sin's hand and meowed a few times. No Hao Sin drew a talisman on his hand and placed it on the ground where the light was shining. Then he put his hand through the crack and picked up a doll. The doll looked like a little girl, wearing a red dress made of votive paper. Its body was covered in blood, its long, tangled hair covered half of its face. But No Hao Sin still felt like the doll's eyes were moving. The lynx raised its head to look behind the doll, continuously meowing resentfully. No Hao Sin raised his head to look. He was startled when he saw the shadow of a girl around 15 or 16 years old. She was wearing a red dress. Her hair was exactly like the doll he was holding. What is it? Did the one who sealed it here do so to help him keep an eye on the little demons? The lynx was trying very hard to convey something, but unfortunately, No Hao Sin could not understand. He stood up and was about to move when the shadow turned into its ferocious mode. Its hair was flying, its eyes were fierce, its mouth was wide open, and it raised its hand to claw at him. Whatever you are, you cannot kill me. And I cannot kill you, so let us get along. No Hao Sin coldly looked at the shadow. The shadow was very faint. Perhaps it had not absorbed anything for a long time, so it did not have much strength left. When it saw the little demons escape from the spirit cat and pounce on it, it was so scared that it bent down and sat down. No Hao Sin blocked the demons. He suddenly understood something. This shadow seemed to be trapped here to be prey for the little demons. Don't be afraid, let me help. No Hao Sin sat back down, looking at the doll and then at the shadow. It seemed like it had died a long time ago, so its memories had long since disappeared. Its mind was like a blank white space without any trace of anything. It was not a ghost, but just a pure soul. If he gave it to Truong Di Quan, would it be of any help to him? Anyway, now that this battle was over, that doll needed to be dealt with to save its soul. Otherwise, once the doll escaped, it would definitely push its soul into the gates of hell and practice evil. Wu Huaixing aimed at a direction in the room, then put the doll down. After a few spells, the doll struggled terribly, but in the end, it succumbed and shattered, burning in Wu Huaixing's fire. Chapter 8, Train Number 44. The night was gradually fading, the sun was about to rise. There was not much time left. No Hao Sin quickly collected the little girl's soul into the pendant around Truong Di Quan's neck. The little ghosts had disappeared, proving that the sun had risen. Lin Mu also quickly ran to scratch at the door. No Hao Sin opened the door and watched it fly to the ground and disappear. Only then did Zhang Yijuan remember the wound on Wu Huaixing's hand. But after turning his hand over, he couldn't see any wound. Wu Huaixing's palms were smooth and rosy without any marks. The morning returned to normal. Truong Di Quan went down to the lobby to tell the innkeeper about calling a repairman. The innkeeper saw the room was in ruins, but still did not have any doubts, just nodded mechanically. After the old lady disappeared behind the stairs, Zhang Yijuan breathed a sigh of relief and asked, "She's really strange, isn't she? She clearly didn't ask how we got in, nor did she ask why the room was so damaged. Isn't it true that in this day and age, as long as you have money, you can have everything? She doesn't care." No Hao Sin stood on the balcony looking around and spoke. Truong Di Quan denied. "She is not normal at all." No Hao Sin, you can fight ghosts. Can you help her see if she is a ghost? Truong Di Quan, you don't even wonder why I can draw charms and fight demons then. You're not normal either. No Hao Sin was calm and received a punch from Truong Di Quan. Obviously, for some reason, Truong Di Quan never questioned anything about No Hao Sin. Perhaps one day, even if No Hao Sin turned into a demon, he would not question anything. The two of them ate snacks on the balcony and chatted until after 8 o'clock when the repairman arrived. The two workers had just walked into the lobby carrying their tools when they sneezed a few times in a cold sweat. As soon as they went upstairs, the two of them whispered something to each other, something like because there had just been a case here. But for some reason, the press had not reported anything about this case. Zhang Yijuan had investigated it before, but he had not seen it in the previous cases. All he knew was from the content of the articles in the discussion group. The two men threw their tools on the ground as soon as they reached the door and stared into the room. Zhang Yijuan and Wu Huaixing were clearly standing in front of the door, but the two workers' eyes were fixed on the backs of their heads. There's no devil, I won't do it. One of the workers suddenly sat down on the ground, holding his head and groaning, as if he had seen something terrifying. The other was also trembling, sweat pouring down his forehead, but he was still staring into the room. No Hao-Eisen slowly turned his head to look at the worker. He frowned slightly, and then raised his hand to strike the empty air. Truong Diquan saw that, and looked but saw nothing. The worker standing there saw No Hao-Eisen finished working, immediately wiped the sweat from his forehead, then absent-mindedly leaned against the wall. Don't lean on that. Fortunately, No Hao-Eisen stopped him in time. That was the room of the ghost Fate Tang Mon. If he were to lean in and be noticed by it, it would be no different from an unjust death. No Hao-Eisen squatted down and placed a talisman on the back of the person who was hugging his knees. He said, "Don't be afraid, I am here to help you." The person hugging his knees gradually calmed down, and the person standing there realized that Wu Huaixing was not normal. At this moment, he saw Wu Huaixing waving his hand to beat the ghost, and he felt somewhat relieved. After all, it was a job to earn money, and the wages here were double the normal rate. He just needed to work hard for a few days. In front of money, people really had more courage to fight against fear. Wu Huaixing ended up being the reluctant supervisor for the two repairmen. Zhang Yijuan went out shopping, and then bought 2 boxed lunches. The two squatted in the hallway, eating the boxed lunches, looking no different from beggars. At noon, when the two workers had gone out to eat, they were still sitting in the hallway, and saw the landlady taking a guest upstairs. There were clearly many empty rooms on the first floor, but she took the guest upstairs. The 10th floor was empty. That guest must have felt very happy alone. No Hao-Eisen was sitting against the wall when he suddenly sat up. He remembered the 2nd floor of the paper money shop in Quitan, so he suddenly noticed that guest. She was a girl of about 25 years old, wearing a long white dress, her black hair hanging loosely down to her waist. At first glance, she looked exactly like a ghost of a virgin. Especially, her shoes looked really problematic. The skirt was long past the ankles and was paired with a pair of white flat shoes, not showing the ankles at all. When walking, one always had the feeling that the shoes were too big, and every time one lifted one's foot, it would slip. But No Hao-Eisen didn't think so. He was wondering what was underneath the skirt. Was it a pair of legs or not? "What are you looking at? Do you like her?" Truong Diquan saw No Hao-Eisen absent-mindedly looking at the two people going up the stairs and pushed him. No Hao-Eisen was still absent-minded. He shook his head and said, "No, don't you feel like her way of walking is a bit strange?" Both of them strained their eyes to look, because they had only gone up 2 or 3 steps, so they could still vaguely see. Every time she lifted her foot to go up the stairs, she always felt like her shoe was about to fall off, extremely reluctant. Zhang Yijuan noticed this and said, "It's daytime now, there's no ghost there, right? Can't you see it's 12 noon? When you were little, didn't your mother tell you not to go to deserted places at 12 noon or you'll be captured by ghosts?" This sentence of No Hao-Eisen said exactly like an old man. Truong Diquan said, "That's true, but I don't think this place is deserted. This is the biggest city in our country." "So who was chased by a ghost last night in the biggest city in our country?" Zhang Yijuan admitted defeat. Actually, he also felt that there was something wrong with that girl. No one would have the appearance of a virgin ghost like that, and dare to go up to the 2nd floor. Suddenly, an idea came to him, so he said, "Wu Huaixing, why don't you stay here with me? We're in the same room, if there's anything you can help me with. That room is full of strange guests. I'm really scared." "You asked me to share a room with you? Just the two of us?" No Hao-Eisen's reaction was a bit too much. Truong Diquan widened his eyes in surprise and said, "We are both men. Do you understand that we are men? Well, even if you are a bit more handsome than me, what can I do to you?" It's not that No Hao-Eisen is afraid of sharing a room. It's not like he hasn't slept around before. It's just that he needs to do some things. Things aren't as peaceful as before, so living alone is much easier. Trong Di-kwan's coaxing failed, so he changed his strategy. How about we rent another room for you to stay in? That's fine, right? She won't rent to me. Don't you see I'm ruining her house? No Ho-ai-sin turned his face to room number 9, which was a mess. Even though the construction workers had worked hard all morning, it was still as messy as a dog. Just as the old lady who owned the motel was coming down, Trong Di-kwan came over and asked. She bluntly said, "He's staying? I won't let him rent it. He's already ruined the feng shui of one of my rooms. If it weren't for your sake, I would have kicked him out a long time ago." "Grandma," Trong Di-kwan called out to the old lady, but no Ho-ai-sin pulled him back and said, "Did I say something wrong? She won't let me rent." After saying that, she also gave him a charitable smile, which made Trong Di-kwan furious. No Ho-ai-sin sat back against the wall, thinking about what she said. Why should he respect Trong Di-kwan? What benefit did Trong Di-kwan bring to them? She dared to look at him, but that did not mean she was human. Because the room was not yet repaired, and the owner of the motel did not want no Ho-ai-sin to ruin another room, she asked Trong Di-kwan to stay somewhere else for the night. At nearly 6 p.m., Trong Di-kwan went to get his car, but after driving a short distance, he realized that he was lost. He should have gone left, but he turned right by mistake, and as a result, he couldn't remember the way back after walking for a while. Zhang Yijun was a bit lost, especially in crowded places. He didn't have his phone with him, so he could only sit down and rest at the bus stop. He asked passers-by for directions to number 44, Wu Run Motel, but none of them knew. There were no taxis on the road, and finally he saw a bus slowly pulling into the station. At first he didn't pay much attention, until he saw that there were 6 people on the bus and a male driver. He really didn't intend to get on the bus, until a little girl of about 8 years old came running up crying. As the bus was about to leave, the little girl fell to the ground again, but her face was filled with sadness as she looked at the bus. Seeing it, he couldn't ignore it. Zhang Yijun stood up and chased after her, calling for the bus to stop, then helped the little girl up. The little girl looked extremely pitiful. Her face was clearly pretty, but it was filled with sadness. He was worried, so he asked, "Why are you riding the bus alone? Is there no one with you?" "My dad works far away, and my mom hasn't been home for a few days. Only my grandma is at home, but she's old and can't go with me." The little girl's voice was very cute. He asked, "So where are you going now?" "I'm looking for my mom. I heard that if you take bus number 44 at the end of Vonan Street and sit until the last stop, you will find her." Zhang Yijun began to suspect, and at this time the driver also urged him to get in the car with an annoyed tone. Without thinking, he decided to get in the car with the girl. The car slowly rolled, and soon passed Warren Street. Unexpectedly, at the end of Warren Street, there were only a few houses. There were 9 people on the bus right now. Why did Zhang Yijun hate the number 9 so much? "Let's not look at them yet, let's ask the girl first." The 2 of them sat in the middle row of the bus. He asked, "What's your name? Who did you hear say that taking this bus will help you find your mother?" "My name is Wai Lai, a kind uncle told me that. He told me to just take this bus, get off at the last stop, and I will definitely find my mother." Wai Lai said very sadly. Trong Di-kwan groped for No Ho-ai-sin's amulet. Luckily, it was still in his pocket. Trong Di-kwan leaned forward and asked the driver, "Driver, can you tell me where the last stop of this bus is?" Just as he finished asking, the car suddenly bumped into something and bounced up. He reached out to the front seat and touched the hair of the girl sitting there. Just as he was about to apologize, he realized that his hand felt slimy, like he had touched seaweed at the bottom of a lake. The driver was about 50 years old. He looked up at the rearview mirror and said, "Young man, didn't you read the signs before getting in the car? This bus goes from Vonan Street to Dongtang Hamlet in B District." "Where the hell was that?" Zhang Yijun looked out the car window. It was probably just after 6 p.m., but the street was already dark, only dimly visible. The further out of town, the more sparse the houses, only trees and grass on both sides of the road. Occasionally a temple could be seen on the side of the road. Usually, any road with a temple would often have accidents. Chapter 9, The Bus to Hell. Only then did Zhang Yijun begin to observe the passengers in the car. Sitting in front of him was a girl with mossy hair whom he had just touched. Ever since he got in the car, she had been sitting with her head down, and he couldn't even see her face when he got in the car. Curious, he began to speak. "Miss, can I apologize for touching your hair just now?" Sure enough, she didn't answer, and Ely beside him kept tugging on his shirt. Was she falling asleep? Then there was no need to ask. As soon as he settled down in his seat, he heard the driver say, "Young man, my bus has a few rules, which is to ask the passengers to be quiet." Quickly realizing the problem, he had to find a way to escape. Truong Di Quan still said, "Driver, can you stop the car? I want to get out." But in response to his request, the driver said, "You have to go to the last stop. Our rule is no stopping halfway." This was a terrifying ride. Truong Di Quan asked Wailai quietly, "Aren't you afraid to go alone?" "Brother, have you heard about the legend of bus number 44 that leaves at 6 p.m.? Legend says that bus only carries 7 dead people and goes straight to hell." Wailai spoke in a very strange voice. Truong Di Quan frowned and said, "Superstitious, how could there be such a legend in this city?" Speaking up to hear, Truong Di Quan suddenly stopped. Only carrying 7 dead people. Could it be that the other 6 people were all dead people? Then the 7th person, between him and Wailai, who would be the one to die? The road outside was getting darker and darker. Zhang Yijuan looked at his watch. It was 7 o'clock. There were only a few dim lights in the car that seemed to be about to go out, and there were no street lights outside. Today was the 15th day of the 3rd lunar month. Normally, on the 15th day of the 3rd lunar month, the moon would rise very early and bright. But tonight, the moon seemed very dim. The clouds covered the moon. Only a faint light could be seen shining down. Zhang Yijuan looked outside, and occasionally he saw a few human shadows passing by. They looked roughly like humans, except for their strange footsteps. Thinking back, he felt that their footsteps were more similar to the girl who came to the 2nd floor at noon. While he was thinking, Wailai tugged on his shirt. He turned around. The girl looked scared and looked forward. He thought she saw something scary in front of the car. But then the car suddenly swerved. The rearview mirror above the driver's head swayed. Truong Di Quan stared with wide eyes. He had clearly seen it just now, but now he could not see the driver's reflection in the mirror. Was that what Wailai was afraid of? Probably not, because she wouldn't have such a high level of observation. The mirror still hadn't stopped swinging, and another scene appeared. At this moment, Wailai was startled and turned to hug him. Because at this moment, the mirror was swinging this way, and the girl sitting in the chair in front of him. In the mirror her eyes were white, her face was swollen, her hair was covered with moss, just like a drowning person. Truong Di Quan hugged Wailai, trying to reach forward to block her sight. It's okay. Brother, who will die between us?" Wailai's question surprised Truong Di Quan. After a few seconds, he said, "If you were so scared, why did you get in the car?" "Because I want to go find my mother. Just thinking about seeing her makes me stop being afraid." The little girl said that her mother had only been gone for a few days, but why did it feel like she hadn't seen her for so long? Zhang Yijuan didn't know what to say for the moment. Yili was trying to suppress her emotions. She sobbed softly and continued, "Actually, I don't have a father. My mother and grandmother raised me. But yesterday my grandmother suddenly became seriously ill. This morning she seemed to have stopped breathing." Zhang Yijuan froze, observing Yili's complexion. She looked very rosy, though just a little haggard. But the tone of voice when talking about her grandmother made him shiver. In a big city like this, not in the middle of a deserted mountain or forest, there was no way to hide a person's death, and why didn't she tell the neighbors or call the police instead of getting on this bus? Could it be that this Wailai really isn't an ordinary person? And the grandmother she's been seeing all this time isn't her real grandmother? Zhang Yijuan suddenly remembered the dream he had that night, and also the moment he saw a ghostly sign at the city gate. Then he went all the way to the Warren Inn, and was haunted by ghosts. Now he was dragged onto a bus with a deadly legend for no reason. Could it be that he himself was involved in this? Could it be that because he made money from ghost stories, he was now being punished by karma? In any case, the current situation was to calmly find a way to survive. He could only hope that Wu Huixing with his magical powers could find him. Wailai was less afraid, but she still kept her head down, not daring to look up. Zhang Yijuan was a little nervous. He looked at his watch. It was already 7:30. The car was getting closer and closer to the deserted road. On both sides of the road, he occasionally saw an abandoned school, and in some places there were larger, cold temples. On both sides of the road, it was cold, and only after a long stretch did he see a dim yellow streetlight shining down. A little further on, the bus loudspeaker blared a mechanical voice. "We have arrived at Dongtang Hamlet. Please prepare to get off at the last stop." Normally, the loudspeaker would play the broadcast 3 times. But this cold, deadly loudspeaker only played it once. Zhang Yijun cursed inwardly. What the hell is a terminal? It clearly didn't stop at any station. What a lie! After driving for about 3 more minutes, a stone castle appeared ahead. The bus made a strange creaking sound and slowly stopped. Ely grabbed Zhang Yijun's shirt and said, "Let's get off the bus quickly. This bus won't stop for more than 7 minutes." The two people stood up, but it seemed like they couldn't get off right away. 7 minutes, corresponding to 7 people, Zhang Yijun realized this. Because the girl sitting in front of him was getting off the bus slowly. As soon as she got off, the people behind him lined up to get off the bus one by one. 7 minutes, 7 dead. If his guess was correct, then in a few minutes something would happen. It was really impossible to cut through the line. Even though there was only one person walking, it felt like the path was blocked off. Ely also seemed to have realized something. After the 6th person started walking down, the hand that was clutching Zhang Yijun's shirt tightened even more. Zhang Yijun could only hold the girl's hand tightly to comfort her. After the 6th person got out of the car's loudspeaker mechanically blared, "Please, last passenger, get off the car. You have 60 seconds to do so." Wai Lai swallowed hard. Both of them did not move and just stared at the others. After getting off the car, they continuously lined up to enter the castle. The large, gloomy gray-black castle gate was there. It was half open for the 6 people to enter. "You have 30 seconds left. Please get off the bus quickly." If it wasn't for the ghost car, Zhang Yijun would have thought it was a piece of modern technology. There were about 15 seconds left, and each passing second was heavy. The car's speakers played the last 10 seconds, as if it was judging the remaining life of the 2 people in the car. Suddenly, Wai Lai pulled Truong Di Quan forward, then struggled to get out of his hand. At this time, Truong Di Quan looked everywhere in the car and saw the seconds counting down. 5, 4, 3. At this moment, Wai Lai used all her strength to push him out of the car. The strength of an 8-year-old girl was like a powerful force. Truong Di Quan kept staring at Wai Li's expression as she pushed him out of the car. Her expression was full of sadness, fear, and despair. Zhang Yijun landed roughly. As soon as the car door closed, the car immediately turned around and headed back. Zhang Yijun quickly dragged his aching body up and ran after the car, but unfortunately he couldn't see anything, including Wai Lai. Zhang Yijun dejectedly raised his head and looked up at the moon. Here, one could clearly see the full moon rising above the castle. However, it seemed like the wind was pulling clouds to cover the moon, but because there were few clouds, the light was still visible, although it was a bit dim. The thin clouds spread across the moon, looking very strange. It felt like a huge eyeball full of silk threads was staring at him. Which direction should he go now? It was such a long distance, there was no way he could walk back. Wu Huaixing probably wouldn't come looking for him. What should he do? He felt in his pocket. Luckily the talisman was still intact. This was his only hope at the moment. What to do? Staying and going in tormented Zhang Yijun, until the shadow of the bus disappeared in the dim moonlight. He finally came back to his senses. Remembering the soul that Wu Huaixing had trapped in his pendant, he touched it and muttered, "Girl, if you have a spirit, please help me." The tall iron gate of the castle was ajar. There was no wind at the moment, but it creaked. The sound was both mentally torturing Zhang Yijun and inviting him to come in. Looking closely, the door was slightly discolored and even peeling. This was a castle built in Western architecture, probably over 100 years old. The 2 pillars of the iron gate were carved with the image of some animal. The long animal coiled around the pillar, looking like a dragon but not. It only had a long body like a dragon. Its head was like a queen ant with 2 big eyes protruding from its sockets. Its upper body had gills like a python, and its lower body had hundreds of legs like a centipede. Isn't this the 100-legged dragon? This is an ancient creature. Could it be that the 100-legged dragon really existed in this world? Zhang Yijun swallowed hard, then squeezed his way in. But he had no idea that the moment he stepped in, the 200-legged dragons coiled around the pillar suddenly moved. Obviously, he couldn't see clearly from outside, but when he went inside, he saw that on the ground there were clusters of flowers growing close together. Because it was dark, he couldn't see the color clearly, but he knew very well the shape of this flower. Spider lily. Isn't this a flower that can only be grown in D City? Because he had researched this flower before. According to his beliefs, it was a flower used to summon souls. The 6 people who had entered earlier had disappeared without a trace. At this moment, he also heard a sound like the ringing of a bell coming from the castle. He slowly walked a few more steps in. From a distance, the sound only sounded clear like the ringing of a bell, but when he got closer, he realized that it was the sound of a piano. The castle was magnificent and majestic. The piano's sound was clear and bright. This was really similar to his other dream. The only difference was that his previous dream was raining, while this one had the moon. Chapter 10: Ghost in the Castle. Abandoned places like this would usually be haunted by ghosts, nothing strange. But Zhang Yijuan didn't seem to think so. Fortunately, he was a wise man, so after the battle at the Qiuhan Inn, he thought things weren't that simple anymore. Wu Huixing seemed to know something. He would definitely have to ask him when he returned. This place was filled with a strong ghostly aura. Qiuhan Inn was far inferior to this place. But after all, Truong Di Quan was an ordinary person, so he only felt that this place had a heavy aura. Looking at the dense clumps of Lycoris, it seemed that each clump had its own life. A path right at the gate led straight into the castle. The path was only about a meter long and paved with stone. Zhang Yijuan slowly walked in. Every step he took felt like thousands of eyes were staring at him. He raised his head. On the upper floor of the castle there was a window wide open. Under the dim moonlight, he saw a white figure standing there, seemingly looking down at him. Stumbled over a small stone. By the time he looked up, the shadow had disappeared. At this moment, No Huixing was driving Truong Di Quan's car on the road. Because he had been waiting all afternoon, but still did not see Truong Di Quan return. Feeling bad, he turned back to ask the motel owner. Finally, she told him about the legend of bus number 44. The ghost bus transported the souls at the end of Vo Nan Street to Dongtang Hamlet. Every day it left at 6 p.m., and only 7 people No Huixing arrived at the bus stop and somehow picked up Truong Di Quan's car keys. When he found the car keys, he was still wondering why they hadn't been picked up. But when he bent down to pick them up, he bumped into a little girl's hand. The little girl was a spirit. It turned out that the little girl had kept Truong Di Quan's key, so it wasn't stolen. No Huixing raised his head to look up. It wasn't completely dark yet, so he could see the little girl clearly. She was about 8 or 9 years old, with a pretty face and a pair of sad, bewildered eyes. No Huixing thanked him quickly and turned back to get the car, but unexpectedly, when he got in the car, he saw the girl reflected in the rearview mirror. It turned out that the girl had followed him and was now sitting in the back seat. After all, this girl was a naive soul, basically incapable of harming anyone. If she had followed him, there must be a reason. Regardless, he would go find Truong Di Quan first, and then figure it out. But when No Huixing ran out of Vo Nan Street, he was stuck. Because when he entered the address, the map could not locate Dongtang Hamlet. While he was confused, he remembered that little girl, so he signaled her to follow Truong Di Quan's scent and show him the way. The two of them left the city and were now running on the cold, deserted road towards Dongtang Hamlet. Dongtang Hamlet. Zhang Yijuan was still walking into the castle. The moon was still the same, not changing at all. The air was eerily silent. Even though this place was deserted, not even the sound of insects could be heard. With Zhang Yijuan's experience, a place without the sound of insects was definitely a place filled with ghosts. While he was deep in thought, a crow suddenly flew over his head, cawing a few times, startling Zhang Yijuan. Damn it, there were even crows. Was there a dead body nearby? Crows symbolize bad luck, because wherever they appear, there will definitely be someone dead or about to die. Crows can smell the scent of dead bodies, so whenever people hear a crow cawing, they are startled and scared. Although that was the first thought that came to his mind, he knew that there was no shortage of corpses here. He had the feeling that wherever he went, dozens of bony hands would reach out from the ground and grab his ankles. Of course, he had to look down to confirm it first. Although there was nothing there yet, he didn't think it wouldn't happen. After writing horror stories for 7 years, he just discovered today that his current rich imagination is really scary. Before the ghosts even appear, he is already scared out of his wits by his own imagination. Ah, 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 ah. Zhang Yijuan shouted loudly, stirring up the quiet space. Because as soon as he raised his head, he saw a white shadow appear right in front of him. When he calmed down, he discovered that it was actually just a white cloth that was blown by the wind. Now the cloth was being blown by the wind and lying on the ground. What a freak! He clearly couldn't feel any wind, yet the piece of cloth was able to fly. That urged him to go in even faster, but after only a few steps, he was blocked by something like an invisible wall. He couldn't move, and he felt extremely tired and exhausted. Just as he was about to turn back, he heard a creaking sound coming from the gate. A dark figure was standing tall in the middle of the gate under the dim moonlight. Mo Huixing? Zhang Yijuan saw a familiar figure, but did not dare to go out, just in case he asked. The cold voice of the shadow rang out. Still alive? Then let's go home quickly. It was indeed No Huixin. Zhuang Diquan's legs started to move at full speed as he walked out. But this time, even though he had gone far away, he could still hear the sound of the piano clearly. The sound of the piano rang out sharply, like a sharp thread cutting into the listener's ears. The further he walked, the more urgent the sound of the piano became, urgent. Zhang Yijuan couldn't stand it anymore. He turned around. From outside the long corridor upstairs, a white shadow quickly passed by. The sound of the zither was reaching its climax, just like the drums urging an execution. His eyes gradually blurred. Before him were only terrifying ghostly images that kept rotating continuously. His breathing was stagnant. He felt like his life was being slowly taken away. Just when he felt like he was about to die, someone covered his hands with theirs. The sounds gradually disappeared, and he felt like he had regained his life. His breathing also stabilized, and Zhang Yijuan closed his eyes and slowly opened them. Everything had disappeared, leaving only the original scene. You are quite reckless. If you let me go to this hellish place, I will not go. Wu Huixing looked at Zhang Yijuan's neck and frowned slightly. Then he looked straight at the castle. It was clear that his gaze was not filled with fear, but with curiosity and hatred. Wu Huixing didn't even know how old he was. Having lived in this world for so long, there was nothing that scared him anymore. If talking about what No Huixin fears, there is probably only one thing, which is his own immortality. The two of them also went out, but before they reached the gate, they both heard a commotion behind them like a night festival. There must be hundreds of people. A chill ran down Zhang Yijuan's spine. He tried to stay calm to keep up with Wu Huixing. As soon as they reached the gate, the 200-legged dragons on both sides were moving. But unfortunately, before they could do anything, Wu Huixing gave each of them a talisman. After the two of them had just left the castle gate, there was clearly no wind, but the gate automatically closed with a loud bang. Zhang Yijuan quickly jumped into the car, leaving only Wu Huixing to look inside one more time. The car sped along the deserted road. It was now past 9 p.m. The moonlight was already high overhead. Zhuang Diquan told No Huixin the whole story, but No Huixin refused to answer. The moon could not shine in. Only the lights inside the car were dim. Just then, the car hit a pothole and shook slightly. The rearview mirror also shook. Zhang Yijuan saw the reflection of a little girl in the back seat. Ili. Zhang Yijuan was not afraid at all, and quickly turned around to search. That's right, the child sitting in the back seat was Ili, but why was he here? Wu Huixing asked. Do you know him? I know. It's the child I told you about. Ili. Are you sure the person with you is a human? I'm sure, I was still holding it at that time. Zhuang Diquan suddenly stopped. He was trying to remember a detail. No Huixin frowned slightly and asked, How? I remember, when I held it, it seemed like it wasn't breathing. Zhuang Diquan suddenly felt a chill when he remembered this detail. At that time, everything was so sudden that he didn't pay attention. Now he remembered that when he held the girl, her whole body was cold, without any warmth. Only then did No Huixin gradually understand. He said, Because she is not completely human. The soul in your pendant has escaped. It has entered Wei Li's body and pushed her soul out. So is everything that fake Wei Li said all made up? Probably not, because it can use the host's memories. Li's soul that was pushed out is now completely ignorant. No wonder it kept your car keys, and then followed me. So it wants us to find its body. After hearing that, Zhuang Diquan broke out in a cold sweat. He wiped his sweat with his hand and said, You didn't use anything to lock it up. How could you let it escape and take over someone's body? Why should I imprison a soul? If I imprison a soul, I will suffer the consequences. No Huixin only spoke the truth. He would not touch normal spirits that did not harm him. And the talisman he gave Zhuang Diquan could only deal with evil spirits, but was completely harmless to normal spirits. Those truths spoken from No Huixin's mouth were extremely provocative. Zhuang Diquan angrily leaned his head against the window and took a nap. But his sleep only lasted 15 minutes. Then he suddenly woke up, startling everyone. Where should we sleep tonight? Should we stay up all night looking for Wei Li's body? From the rearview mirror, one could see that Li's expressionless face was now completely dumbfounded. Even though she was just a stupid soul, it seemed like she felt that Zhang Yijuan's idea was extremely bad. Wu Huixing said, "We can't bring Yi's soul back to the hotel. Let's sleep here and wait at 6 p.m. tomorrow at the bus station to wait for Yi's body to appear." Even though he didn't really want to, he didn't dare to resist No Hao Sin. After all, if a demon really appeared, No Hao Sin would be able to handle it. Chapter 12, The Man Who Holds the Demon. Truong Di Quan tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He borrowed No Hao Sin's phone to go online. He logged into his Facebook account and searched for the Chiu Han Motel discussion group. Sure enough, the fourth case had appeared in the pinned post at the top of the group. This time, it was a hidden phone in the corner of the wall that recorded it. The incident started when the guy was intimate with a ghost and was discovered by the woman. Then they started arguing with each other, and the murder occurred. Obviously, the person who set up the camera intentionally wanted to record the guy's crime. The cases at Chiu Han Motel were all different. The other 3 cases all happened after midnight, and on inauspicious days, 1 month apart. Only this case happened in the same month as the 3rd case, and the method was also different. Then in the last row it was noted that the guy had passed away and the woman was in a coma. Zhang Yijuan knew that Wu Huixing was not interested in these things, so after reading them, he logged out. But as soon as he logged out, another message appeared on the screen. Originally, reading other people's messages was a crime, but at this moment, Zhang Yijuan felt like committing a crime. The clock on his phone ticked to midnight. He glanced at Wu Huixing, who was sleeping soundly, then clicked on the message he had just sent. A series of numbers without a name. The content is, "Be careful of the person you want to protect. It's best not to continue interfering in our business. Otherwise, I'm afraid he will be condemned to hell forever." This was a threatening message, but what caught Truong Di Quan's attention the most was the image of piano keys appearing at the end of the message. Piano keys? Obviously seen it somewhere before. That's right, in the Chiu Han Motel case, there was a mention of piano keys appearing at the crime scene. Why did that person send threatening messages to No Hao Sin in the middle of the night? Who was the person he wanted to protect? Don't continue to interfere in their business. Could it be that they were talking about what he did at Chiu Han Motel? This was a new turning point, because it was very possible that these ghost cases all had human involvement. What kind of person would control demons to harm others like that? Zhang Yijuan scratched his head and thought for a while, then finally decided to delete the message he sent. Doing bad things and erasing traces, after all, he thought that if Wu Huixing had intervened, he definitely wouldn't be afraid of anything. Right now, he just wanted to know who Wu Huixing was protecting. Just as he gently put the phone back to No Hao Sin, he unscrewed the cap of the mineral water bottle, and before he could drink it, he was startled. Li's soul leaned forward from behind, its cold face pressed against his. Truong Di Quan was startled and squeezed the mineral water bottle. Water splashed all over No Hao Sin's head. What happened after that really doesn't need to be told anymore. Because Li's soul could not enter Chiu Han Inn and other places, they had no choice but to leave her in the car. And then No Hao Sin was also not at ease, so the two of them decided to stay in the car for another day. After all, it was partly his fault that Li was possessed. After 5 p.m., they drove to the end of Vonan Street, ambushing beside the bus stop waiting for the fake Li to appear. But after waiting for a long time, he still didn't show up, and the spirit of Li sitting in the back began to get impatient. The clock struck exactly 6 o'clock. A bus with the number 44 slowly emerged from the crowd of vehicles, pulling into the stop. The bus stopped for about 7 minutes. They observed very carefully but still did not see Li or anyone else getting on the bus. Truong Di Quan had bought binoculars beforehand to keep an eye out. It was clear that when the bus pulled into the station, there was only the driver, but when the bus left, there were 7 more passengers on board. Li is nowhere to be seen. Zhang Yijuan put away his binoculars and spoke Yi's spirit behind him seemed to be crying. Wu Huixing originally intended to follow the bus, but then he turned around. Zhang Yijuan turned his head to look at the bus and said, "Where are you going?" At this moment, Li's body appeared in front of the gate of a villa on the outskirts of the city. A small body of a girl under 10 years old had brazenly kicked open the gate. The maid ran out of the house and saw the scene, panicking and screaming. She ran after Li, pretending to teach her a lesson, but she was grabbed by the neck and thrown into a nearby potted plant. Because of the strong impact on her head, it seemed that she almost died. Li's body and soul were both very pure, so even if this place was a hell, nothing could be done to it. On the second floor, a man stood with his back to the balcony of the room. Even though the balcony was covered with curtains, he could still tell that the fake Wai Lai was entering. Unable to see his face clearly, he was a middle-aged man with an ordinary figure, and he was smiling mysteriously, waiting. Sure enough, the fake Wai Lai did not enter through the door, but directly flew up to the second floor, kicked the curtain open and flew in. He landed easily, his hair falling down, partially covering his lovely and adorable face. But on that lovely and adorable face was a pair of eyes filled with resentment. "Little girl, you still haven't gone to find your mother. Why are you here?" It turned out that this was the man who had told Wai Lai to get on bus number 44 to the last stop. Wai Lai pretended to raise her head, but then she raised her claws and pounced on the man, wanting to scratch him. "You bastard, why did you kill me? Why did you lock me in that trap and let those little devils tear me apart day and night? What did I do to you to deserve such excruciating pain?" The man did not say anything, he did not move, but thousands of hands appeared from the dark void, ready to strangle the fake Wai Lai. But the fake Wai Lai was not afraid. Its face was expressionless, only its eyes were filled with unconcealable hatred. Right at this moment, 9 red fox tails suddenly grew out from behind its back. The man with his hands clasped behind his back suddenly trembled. Perhaps he was very agitated as he said, "I didn't expect that guy to reach all the way to my place again. He has released you, but don't even think about escaping. If you can't escape, what else can you do to me? I've borrowed such a powerful host. Am I still afraid of you?" As soon as the fake Ili spoke, its 9 red tails suddenly swung in all directions. Then from the dark sky came painful groans. Its 9 tails had already grabbed the dirty things hiding in the darkness. Just as it was about to whip the man, a wave of miasma suddenly flew in from outside. The fake Ili seemed to be afraid of this miasma. It quickly retracted its tail and jumped over the balcony to run outside. At this moment, Wu Huaixing and his group drove over. Wu Huaixing got out of the car and grabbed the fake Wai Lai by the neck to pull him back. The miasma inside was chasing the fake Wai Lai. Wu Huaixing grabbed the fake Wai Lai with one hand and drew a talisman with the other and threw it inside. Sure enough, the miasma was not strong enough to deal with him, so it hid back inside. No Hao-Ai-Sin looked at the fake Wai Lai whose eyes were filled with murderous intent, then bit his blood and drew a talisman on its forehead. The fake Wai Lai struggled a few times and then tilted its head, and its soul flew out. Truong Di Quan ran out and carried Wai Li's body to the back seat of the car, then looked at the soul flying up beside him. "What is your name? Why did you borrow someone else's body to run here?" No Hao-Ai-Sin asked, but it seemed like the spirit didn't bother to answer. Its expression was extremely resentful. So he didn't care, got into the car with Truong Di Quan, and prepared to drive away. The car had not gone 100 meters when Truong Di Quan was terrified and pointed to the door on No Hao-Ai-Sin's side. It turned out that the spirit was hanging on the door, pressing its face close to it. It couldn't get in because No Hao-Ai-Sin had already put a spell on the car. He glanced at it and rolled down the window for it to crawl in and sit in the back with Wai Lai. At this time, Wai Lai had returned to her body. She was still fast asleep. "I give you 5 minutes. If you still resist, then leave." No Hao-Ai-Sin said coldly, looking like he didn't even care about it. The soul pondered for a long time and finally said, "My name is Huai Nu. I died in my mother's womb." That Noyet's older sister also died early but still grew up because she had half Ling Miao blood. But how did this Huai-Ru grow up? It seemed that Huai-Ru knew their doubts, so she took the initiative to say, "He was the one who trapped me in the battle. He was the one who killed me and took my soul from my mother's womb. My resentment is even more savage than that of the vengeful spirits and evil spirits. But do you know why I am so pure? It's because those little demons ate all my resentment, and I ate their innocence to grow up. Gods and Buddhas in this world have books that record and explain them, but ghosts and demons cannot be explained." While No Hao-Ai-Sin was driving, he looked at the rearview mirror and saw that Wai Lai had woken up. She rubbed her eyes a few times and said, "Mister, thank you for helping me." No Hao-Ai-Sin nodded slightly. Wai Lai looked to the side, observed Huai Nu for a moment, then continued, "Sister, have you gotten your revenge yet? What's going on?" Truong Di Quan suddenly asked. Wai Lai said, "I met her at the bus stop. She cried and begged me to lend her body. But after I left my body, I felt so scared. So you asked to borrow Wai Li's body." In response to Truong Di Quan's question, Huai Nu glanced at him and said, "Or else, you think I went to steal its body. Even though I'm just a spirit, I'm also very polite." After understanding everything, no one had any ill will towards Huai Nu anymore, and even felt sorry for her. The car sped along for a while, passing through several deserted roads. After entering the city, No Ha-I-sin called someone. He probably told that person to investigate the address of that villa and see who owned it. Not long after, that person called back, but he said the address of that villa did not exist. Chapter 12, Skull Demon. Where are we going now? Perhaps to the Chiu Han Inn. We can't go there, we'll go to my house tonight. No Ha-I-sin drove into the city for a while, then drove back to the suburbs in another direction. After about half an hour of driving, No Ha-I-sin finally stopped at the gate of a riverside villa. Wu Huaixing went down to open the gate, and Zhang Yijuan jumped over and drove in. This villa might not be comparable to Pan Yong's mountain villa in City B, but it was still quite expensive. As soon as he drove in, Zhang Yijuan saw a familiar dark gray Porsche parked in the yard. It was Wu Huaixing's car. When they got home, Truong Di Quan was startled because Wai Lai was following them. He jumped up. "Oh my God, is this child kidnapping?" Wai Lai and Ha-I Nu looked at Truong Di Quan blankly. No Ha-I-sin said, "Is your brain damaged? That girl has long been an orphan." Hearing that, Truong Di Quan remembered what the fake Wai Lai said in the car. It could know the host's memories. Inside, Ha-I Nu looked a bit more comfortable. Even her complexion was several times better. If it was No Ha-I-sin's house, there definitely wouldn't be any strange guests. As soon as Truong Di Quan entered the house, he quickly ran upstairs to find a room, took a shower, and jumped into bed as quickly as possible. With only 2 people and 1 soul left, No Ha-I-sin wanted to find out why Ha-I Nu was locked up. But it seemed like she didn't know anything other than what she had said. Back to Wai Lai, she didn't seem to realize the importance of the matter. The sentences that Wai Lai told made No Ha-I-sin more and more confused. But the only truth was that the kind uncle who had directed her to bus number 44 and the person who had killed Ha-I Nu were the same person. If that was the case, then Wai Lai must have had a special fate to have fallen into their sights. It seemed like they were carrying out some terrible plot. They needed to gather enough things to perform a ritual. But what that ritual was, one could only find out slowly. No Ha-I-sin decided to go to Wai Li's house tomorrow to find out why the man had to ask her to take bus number 44 to the castle. After arranging for Wai Lai to go to bed, he also prepared to go to sleep. But at this time, Ha-I Nu kept following him. "What else do you want? Your soul has been released. You should also go reincarnate." No Ha-I-sin pulled the blanket over his head in frustration, but Ha-I Nu went to swing the objects in the room, then blew the thick blanket away. No Ha-I-sin threw the blanket off and sat up, annoyed, saying, "What do you want? I don't want to reincarnate. Can I come with you?" Ha-I Nu begged, but No Ha-I-sin threw cold water on her. "I'm not interested in ghosts." Luckily, Ha-I Nu did not understand what self-esteem was. "You don't need to be interested in me, as long as Zhang Yijuan is interested in me. To repay you for saving me, I volunteered to follow him to protect and help him. It seems like you need someone like me, right?" No Ha-I-sin also heard it very reasonable. After all, he had originally intended. Later, because she stole Wai Li's body, he had developed a feeling of hatred. But now Wai Lai also said that she had asked to borrow the body to take revenge. No Ha-I-sin thought for a few seconds, then nodded in agreement. As the night wore on, Wu Huaixing finally fell asleep. But just as he fell asleep, he was awakened by the sound of the door opening. In the dim light of the night lamp, he opened his eyes wide to look at the thing that was entering. He had placed protective charms around the house, so whatever had entered was definitely a high-level demon. But the one who entered was Truong Di Quan. It seems like he thought too much. I hope he thought too much. As soon as Truong Di Quan entered, he closed the door tightly, then walked straight to the bed. Only when he was so quiet did No Ha-I-sin notice something was wrong. As soon as Truong Di Quan reached the bed, he took off his shirt and showed signs of jumping onto the bed. No Ha-I-sin quickly rolled over to the other side and got out of bed. He said in a low voice, "Truong Di Quan, are you sleepwalking?" "No Ha-I-sin, don't you have any intentions towards me?" Zhang Yijuan said as he prepared to take off more clothes, then started hanging them on the bed. A big question mark appeared in Wu Huaixing's mind, then he looked at Zhang Yijuan suspiciously. Indeed. No Ha-I-sin jumped back onto the bed, kicked Truong Di Quan against the wall. He stood up and said in a strange voice, "You are really smart. I wouldn't believe it if others said you were smart and wise. Who are you, daring to impersonate Truong Di Quan and do such dirty things?" Wu Huaixing frowned. Anger could be seen on his face. That person stood up, laughed arrogantly, and said, "Dirty Wu Huixing, do you really think that people don't know that Zhang Yijuan had feelings for you back then, and that's why he was so ashamed that he committed suicide? You still dare to say that I'm dirty. It's him who's dirty." Damn! No Hao-Ai-Sin flew over and kicked it again. There was also a talisman on his foot. At this moment, he seemed really angry. He continued, "If you don't know what happened that year, then it's best to keep your mouth shut. Truong Di Quan, he is a god among humans. His heart is as pure as the bright moon, without a speck of dirt. How can you use that dirty and lowly mouth to talk about him like that? Great acting. So why did you go through so much trouble and hardship to find him?" No Hao-Ai-Sin looked at the person in the corner of the room with disgust and said, "Unfortunately, you are not qualified to listen." At this moment, thousands of silk threads emerged from the wall, pulling the person tightly against the wall. That person groaned in pain and agony, only to see eyes filled with hatred looking at No Hao-Ai-Sin. He was just a passerby who hated No Hao-Ai-Sin, so he did not know that he had remembered how to draw the talisman. Therefore, now he was regretting it to the extreme. Right now, the demons in the human world probably all hate and consider No Hao-Ai-Sin as an enemy. Because they are jealous that No Hao-Ai-Sin can live forever, jealous that No Hao-Ai-Sin can just sit around doing nothing, but is better than them in everything. No Hao-Ai-Sin doesn't care about this point. Basically, if they attack, they will fight back. If they can't fight back, they will run away, that's all. But this person dared to insult Truong Di Quan, so he absolutely would not forgive him. Truong Di Quan was the purest person he had ever met. The two of them were nothing more than soulmates. Truong Di Quan had the grace of reincarnation with him, and was also the one who gave him a name and guided him to live as a human. As for Zhang Yijuan, he was originally just one of the sentient beings he had saved. Killing and setting fire was just to repay Wu Huixing. Committing suicide was because he felt guilty towards Buddha. He did so without any impure thoughts. No Hao-Ai-Sin tidied his clothes and slowly walked towards the other person. His eyes showed a fierce, murderous intent on his calm face. He stretched his hand forward and tightly grabbed the other person's neck. He had a talisman in his hand, and he squeezed angrily. In no time, the other person experienced intense pain and then disappeared. Perhaps it had been a long time since he had such a murderous heart like tonight, and killed a demon in the most cruel way. Just as he dusted off his hands, No Hao-Ai-Sin saw Hao-Ai-Nu flying and hiding by the door with a frightened expression. Only now did the little girl feel lucky that she had not been killed by No Hao-Ai-Sin. She thought that even if she was scolded a little in the future, she would still happily endure it. Zhang Yijuan had fallen asleep immediately after jumping into bed. Unfortunately, he hadn't slept for long before he was awakened by a knock on the door. He had thought that Wu Huixing's house would be safe, so he wasn't on guard at all. He dragged his feet to the door to open it. Only then did he realize that the knocking was coming from the window. Being sleepy and dependent, he didn't bother to ask any questions, and just went to open the window. But as soon as he opened the window, a human head suddenly fell from above, causing Truong Di Quan to jump in surprise and open his eyes wide. The human head with long hair was upside down, its eyes were rolled back and white, only a long, bright red tongue was sticking out in the normal direction. He had heard of headless ghosts, but this was the first time he had seen a ghost with only a head. Zhang Yijuan was about to scream, but that long tongue stuck out and wrapped tightly around his neck. He tried to pull the tongue with his hand, the slippery, disgusting feeling coming from that tongue. Tomorrow his neck would be squeezed, otherwise he would have vomited green bile. It seemed like it was not just a head, because he saw a lot of hair. Looking through that head to the empty space outside the yard, oh my, there were dozens of heads connected into some kind of shape flying back and forth. Oh no, I've had enough. Truong Di Quan solemnly swore that from now on he would never trust No Hao-Ai-Sin again. Hao-Ai-Nu tried her best to pull the demon's tongue, but it was no use. So she had to run over and call No Hao-Ai-Sin. But as soon as she reached the door, she saw a horrifying scene of No Hao-Ai-Sin killing a demon. No Hao-Ai-Sin turned to look at Hao-Ai-Nu. What happened? Truong Di Quan, he met a bunch of devils. No Hao-Ai-Sin ran past Hao-Ai-Nu in the middle of the door. While running, he drew a talisman on the ground for it to run ahead. The talisman flew into Truong Di Quan's room door, causing everything to shake. That demon head also loosened its tongue. Truong Di Quan took this opportunity to try to remove it, and ran into the bathroom to find No Hao-Ai-Sin's talisman. Of course, the tongue did not give up. It reached in and pulled Zhang Yijuan's leg, causing him to fall face down on the ground. Then it dragged him back towards the window. At this moment, Wu Huixing had entered. No one expected that there was a knife placed in front of each of his doors. The knife flew over and neatly cut off the tongue. Seeing that the tongue was severed, Trong Di Quan desperately crawled forward. No Haisen ignored him, walked over and threw a talisman at the window, knocking away the demon heads clinging outside. Then he jumped out of the window. The window had just closed when outside, dozens of long hair were braided together in a strange shape. No Haisen clung to the windowsill. He coldly bit his finger and quickly drew a large talisman. The talisman fell down like a net from above and caught the hair. They struggled with all their might, using their hair to corrode the edge of the talisman, but it seemed to be unsuccessful. Because as soon as this talisman weakened, No Haisen gave them another talisman. Just like that, in no time they were crushed by the barrier. In the desolate darkness, the crushing sound along with the painful groans rang out at the same time, terrifyingly. Chapter 13. The Ghostly Guest. After finishing off the skull demons, Wu Huixing did something very human. He went out and closed the gate, then went back in through the main door. Zhang Yijuan was still sitting in the room with the wound caused by the skull demon. As soon as Wu Huixing entered, Zhang Yijuan angrily shouted, "I thought there wouldn't be any ghosts in your house." "You just think so, it's not true." No Haisen once again told the truth and made Trong Di Quan furious. He angrily climbed into bed and covered his head with the blanket. The next day, 3 people and 1 ghost went to the girl's house together following the address Wai Lai gave them. Wai Li's house was an ordinary apartment on the 3rd floor. Hao Nu entered Trong Di Quan's pendant, and the 3 of them walked in naturally. Wai Li's apartment was number 27, located in an extremely dark direction. No Haisen had not even entered yet, but he could already smell the strong smell of ghosts. He frowned. This place was really not normal at all. In the middle of such a crowded apartment building, they were brazenly stationed here. It was truly too arrogant. It was now work time, and people were constantly passing by in the hallway. Zhang Yijuan suddenly thought of what Ili had said about her grandmother, suddenly stopping breathing. Perhaps his guess was correct, because if there was a smelly dead person here, it would be impossible for them not to notice. Originally, Wai Lai wanted to open the door, but No Haisen grabbed the key. It was obvious that the door couldn't be opened, as if it was crooked. He had to use a talisman and kick it to open it. No Haisen reached out to turn on the light, but the light bulb flickered as if it was about to go out, making it impossible to see clearly what was inside. Everyone entered one by one. Even Zhang Yijuan felt the heavy Yin atmosphere here. He sniffed and found that Huairu had also gone out. Ili was very natural. When she saw the flickering light, she quickly pulled a high chair and climbed up to fix the light bulb. She only tapped a few times and the light bulb returned to normal. This clearly couldn't be the action of a child. What exactly did Ili have to go through? Passing the living room, the 2 saw 2 photos on the table. One was a photo of Wai Lai with a young and beautiful woman. This seemed to be Wai Li's mother. The 2 looked very similar. The other photo next to it had a woman around 50 or 60 years old. This was probably the girl's grandmother. Wai Li's mother was actually a single mother. "Wai Lai, you said your grandmother is no longer breathing, so where is she now?" Zhang Yijuan asked as he looked around. This was a typical apartment. There was a living room, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. Ili walked to the bedroom on the left and pushed the door open. She said, "My grandmother is in here." Obviously, Wai Li's human actions are more terrifying than ghosts. No Haisen followed Wai Lai into the room. The room was very simple and tidy. Wai Lai walked to the bed, stretched out her tiny arm and pointed at the bed and said, "My grandmother is lying here, but she has passed away." No Haisen felt nothing and saw nothing. Nu saw that and followed. She looked towards the bed and whispered into No Haisen's ear, "There is clearly someone lying on it, but I think it is an illusion created by some force." Illusion? No Haisen still did not understand the problem when at this moment, there was a sound coming from the other bedroom. He quickly turned around. The door was still closed, but the sound inside sounded like someone was there. The strange thing was, Wai Lai did not pay attention to that. The little girl walked back and forth, as if she was really talking to someone. Wu Huixing carefully pushed open the door of the other bedroom. The door was very easy to open. But there was no one inside the room. After the door was opened, the sound stopped. Wu Huixing glanced around. This room was filled with a thick, evil aura. Not only that, it was the kind of evil aura just like room number 7 at the Chiuhan Inn. He walked around the bed, feeling hundreds of arms reaching out from under the bed to grab him. With one kick, the bed flipped over, revealing an exquisite coffin under the bed. With his years of experience lying in coffins, this was a ghost coffin. No Ho-ai-san started touching the coffin to examine it. Indeed, this was a ghost coffin. He could feel what was inside the coffin, so he made a bold decision, which was to open the coffin lid. He dared to open the coffin of a 1,000-year-old spirit fox, let alone a ghost coffin. He did not believe that there were ghosts in the world more powerful than the spirit fox. There was no light in this room, only the light from the living room. As No Ho-ai-san bent down to open the coffin, he felt something cold pass by behind him. No Ho-ai-san's hand stopped. He remembered what Wai-lai had said. Her mother had been away for a few days and hadn't returned yet. Just take the number 44 bus to the last stop, and you'll find her. Why was her mother away? The last stop of the number 44 bus was that haunted castle. Could it be that Wai-li's mother was the victim, and the person who harmed her was the same person who locked Ho-ai-nu up? Then the bus and the haunted castle were also related to that person. This was an organized crime, and the leader had prepared it for a long time. Truong Di Quan was still standing outside, afraid of getting in No Ho-ai-san's way. Ho-ai-nu flew in, but as soon as she reached the door, she suddenly fell to the ground and scratched her neck. Her expression was extremely frightened, just like when she saw the Tang Mon ghost at Chiuhan Inn. Tang Mon, Diaokok, White Tiger. No Ho-ai-san quickly said. Quickly look at the map of this place and Chiuhan Motel. Wu Huixing's phone was held by Zhang Yijuan. He immediately took out his phone to look at the map. He did it very quickly. Zhang Yijuan said, "Look quickly, these two places are in a straight line." No Ho-ai-san stepped outside, took a screenshot, and drew a line. It was indeed a straight line, but he felt it wasn't quite right. He hesitated for a few seconds, then connected the 2 points and drew a triangle. Indeed, No Ho-ai-san looked up the map of the entire city again, and discovered that the triangle he drew was the 3 corners of the city. The devil's fate. What's wrong? Is something wrong? Truong Di Quan looked at No Ho-ai-san's absent-minded expression and asked. No Ho-ai-san looked towards the other room and said, Wai-li's mother might have become a ghostly ghost. But she said her mother had only been away for a few days. She turned into a ghost so quickly? Her grandmother actually died a long time ago, but someone created an illusion for her to live with her. That's why she was able to fix the lights in the house by herself. Tell me, for a girl like her, eating is already a problem. If she lived with her mother, would any mother let her child go fix such a dangerous light bulb? It was so reasonable that Zhang Yijuan couldn't say anything. He frowned for a moment and then said, So that means that before, the child lived with her mother and her grandmother was just a spirit. Do you think it was her mother who created the illusion? She wanted to protect Ili to grow up a little. But now the person manipulating her didn't let time continue, so she disappeared first, then made her grandmother die later? Her mother created an illusion. If the person behind agreed to it, then Wai-lai must have some value to exploit. He told Wai-lai to take the number 44 bus to that castle to meet her mother. Could it be that he wanted Wai-lai to stay at that castle, or did he want Wai-lai to bring Truong Di Quan there? Or was he simply a protector of the ghosts on the bus to get there? If I could talk to her mother, I would know the problem. Wu Huixing gave the phone to Zhang Yijuan and returned to the room. The shadow kept lingering behind him. He bent down and ran his hand around the coffin. He could even open the coffin of the spirit fox. These things might be difficult for ordinary cultivators, but for Wu Huixing, it was just a matter of losing a little blood. The edge of the coffin was quite sharp, accidentally cutting No Ho-ai-san's hand. When the blood had flowed evenly, he drew a talisman and placed it inside. There were creaking sounds from inside the coffin, and occasionally there were also screeching sounds. The demonic energy around the coffin was thick. It wanted to penetrate and approach No Ho-ai-san but failed, so it flew around the room. No Ho-ai-san didn't care. After a few spells were thrown, the coffin finally opened. As soon as the coffin lid was opened, the thing inside the coffin jumped up and strangled No Ho-ai-san. It was just an illusion created by the gas in the coffin. Inside the coffin was a corpse wearing a white dress. It wasn't exactly a corpse, but he didn't know how to say it exactly. But No Ho-ai-san recognized that face. It was Wai-li's mother. Indeed, she had become the victim. On that corpse were stuck 7 or 49 needles. No Ho-ai-san did not understand anything about these things, so he had no idea what their purpose was. Did the fate ghost need a sealed body to accompany it? Then the fate ghost Tang Mong at Chiuhan and was probably the same. The triangle formation, all three corners of the triangle, are guarded by the devil of fate. What is this person's purpose in the end? The piano keys. Is it related to Su Xian Suang from that year? After that farewell, Wu Huixing has not contacted them anymore. If he wants to find them now, he's afraid he'll have to go to Changyang Mountain to find Qin Chiyue. The ghost of fate had not touched him at the moment, so Wu Huixing did not want to cause trouble. He closed the coffin lid and went out. The shadow inside the room was still lingering, perhaps unable to leave this house. As soon as he saw Wu Huixing go out, Zhang Yijun asked, "Did you find anything?" 80% of the time, Wai Li's mother has become a ghostly fate-wrecking guest. In the coffin under the bed containing her body, there are 49 needles specially added to her body. So should we let Wai Li know that her grandmother and mother are both dead? No Huixing glanced at Truong Di Quan. Don't destroy other people's last dream. Wai Li is not an ordinary person. She already knew that her grandmother passed away. Now all her hopes are placed on her mother. If you directly say that her mother has become a ghost, then I'm not sure what she will do. No Huixing, since when did you care about other people's dreams? Before Truong Di Quan could finish speaking, No Huixing's phone showed a call on Messenger. It was his account. Lu Hai Thuong called. She informed him about a case that happened last night. This time she didn't call him to get ideas, but to tell him something shocking. Chapter 14, The Demon Sings. Okay. Truong Di Quan only replied like that and hung up, jumped to a new message, just clicked to see it, and he trembled and almost dropped his phone. The image that Lu Hai Thuong sent was a photo of the victim's death pose when the police discovered it. It wouldn't have been a big problem if he hadn't realized that the pose was so familiar. No Huixing saw and asked, "What's wrong with you?" Zhang Yijun showed the phone to Wu Huixing. Wu Huixing didn't pay attention at first, but he quickly realized that the victim's death posture was exactly like what Zhang Yijun wrote. Zhang Yijun's second supernatural detective story, the perverted murderer killed people exactly like that. It could just be a coincidence, don't worry. No Huixing put his phone in his pocket and went to the next room to call Wai Li. Wai Li was very obedient. She seemed to have realized that she could no longer live with her mother and grandmother, so she followed No Huixing. Originally, No Huixing did not want to interfere in Wai Li's matter, but he heard Hui Nu say that Wai Li's body could grow 9 red fox tails. The fox spirit was dead. It was Vu Truongjiang who killed it. This time he must find Vu Truongjiang. No Huixing, let's go to the scene. Zhang Yijun left mechanically as soon as he finished speaking. This time the crime happened at a nearby luxury villa. The victims of recent crimes were mostly wealthy people. When they arrived, Lu Hai Thuong was still at the scene. She was always wearing office clothes and high heels, and when she saw the two people entering, a smile appeared on her lips. It's late, but the newspaper has already published it. You should be mentally prepared. If any fans notice this detail, you'll be in trouble. Lu Hai Thuong said as he showed Truong Di Quan his phone. It was a newspaper article that had just been published. The victim was a 25-year-old young man, a young master with nothing to do. Last night, he went to a bar until 2 a.m. and didn't come back. This morning his family found him dead in his room and reported it to the police. The victim was tied to the bed with a bedsheet in a cross-shaped position. There were many candles around. His mouth and eyes were sewn with red thread. His limbs had been severed, almost crippled. However, there was one point that was strange. There was not a single trace of blood in the room, or even the white bedsheet. But there was only one strange point. That was the police found a piano key in the corner of the room. When the family discovered the victim's body, it was still soft, and the candle in the room was only half burned. But what horrified them even more was that the victim's mouth was sewn into a smile. This is some kind of sacrificial ritual. Zhang Yijun's forehead broke out in sweat. He blurted out that sentence after looking at the picture. Every detail on the victim's body, even the number of candles and the degree of burning when the body was discovered, were exactly the same. The circumstances, age, appearance, everything was exactly the same without a single mistake. In his novel, the psychopath serial killer commits all kinds of murders just to sacrifice to a divine power he worships. But why is this murder so similar? Lu Hai Thuong, still working? A policeman came out from inside and spoke to Lu Hai Thuong. Truong Di Quan was not interested. He returned the phone to Lu Hai Thuong and went to the car. But the policeman stopped him and said, "Are you the author Trong Di Quan? I have read your work. Although your perspective on crime is still sketchy, I still admit that the content is very engaging." Zhang Yijun was nervous. He had no expression at all. He just said, "I didn't expect a policeman like you to be interested in horror stories. I'll take it as a compliment." "How modest. I also know that you are a very close friend of Hai Thuong. Let me formally introduce myself to you. I am Captain Lam Kwong of the City Police Department, and also Hai Thuong's boyfriend." Lam Kwong smiled warmly. Trong Di Quan was not in the mood. He was just wondering why Lu Hai Thuong was acting so recklessly. It turned out that she was the girlfriend of the criminal police captain. Zhang Yijun finally forced a smile and said, "Sorry, I have something to do today. Let's have a meal together next time." Zhang Yijun, this case is exactly the same as the case you wrote in your third published work. May I ask, what do you think? Zhang Yijun had already turned his back, but Lin Jiang had not given up. His footsteps reluctantly stopped, and at this moment, Wu Huixing had blocked his way behind him, staring at Lin Jiang as he walked over. Lin Jiang was not very handsome, but his eyes were filled with mystery. Wu Huixing smiled benevolently and said, "Sorry, comrade police officer, if you want to interrogate our author, please bring the warrant." If the person receiving Lin Jiang's gaze was Zhang Yijun, he would definitely feel like he was being scrutinized down to the last detail. But unfortunately, that person was Wu Huixing, so that gaze was nothing more than a cross-eyed gaze. Lu Hai Thuong pulled Lin Jiang from the side, signaling him to stop. Then she secretly glanced at Wu Huixing with a bit of fear hidden in her eyes. In the car, Trong Di Quan did not say a word, while I also hugged the bag of bread and ate silently. Ngo Huixing galet Wu Chungjiang Sevadan. Times while driving, but he did not answer. Finally, they returned to Chiuhan Motel. Room number 9 was fixed, not a single thing was missing. The innkeeper didn't have the slightest curiosity, even though the two of them had brought a child back in. Wu Huixing walked around the room to see if there was any change. Zhang Yijun and Ili were lying on the bed. As soon as Ili turned on the TV, she immediately saw the news about the case. After watching it seriously for a while, she said to Zhang Yijun, who was lying exhausted on the bed, "Let me borrow your phone for a moment." Li's tiny fingers kept scrolling across the phone screen. After a while, she said, "Mr. Huixin, do you think the murderer is a crazy fan of Mr. Di Quan?" No. Huixin was looking at the mirror in the bathroom. He stopped, turned his head and looked at Li. If what Li said was true, then wouldn't they be in trouble on top of trouble? Before this matter could be resolved, another matter had already come. Crazy fans recreating the author's gruesome cases. This is not something that has never happened. In the 7th book of Trong Di Quan, it was written, there was a mentally unstable guy who was ostracized by people around him, even his family, for a long time. Because of all kinds of complexes, he hid in the dark basement of his house. After his life gradually came to an end, he was desperate and wanted to commit suicide. But the moment he went online to search for drugs to commit suicide, he accidentally discovered a detective novel. The content in it described many cases and gruesome and cruel murders. At that moment, his life seemed to have found a new light, a new path. So he began to step out of that dark basement. His family thought he had turned his life around, but no one knew that he had become a brutal criminal. Because he admired the author who had enlightened his life, he began to imitate the murderous ways of that novel. Perhaps because of this, Zhang Yijun began to feel afraid. The first time he came to this Chiuhan Inn, there was also a scene that was exactly like the one in his novel. Because it was not the first time, he did not think this was a coincidence. He was wondering if it was really his crazy fan who did this. If so, then the coincidence here was just that the person's plan coincided with the arrangement of the demons. The black-clothed figure knocked on the door in the middle of the night. The more Zhang Yijun thought about it, the more scared he became. He then pulled Wu Huixing away and ran into the bathroom to flush the toilet. Li and Wu Huixing sat on the bed, their eyes locked on each other. The water flushed continuously for about 5 minutes, then suddenly fell silent. He should have finished dressing by now, but Zhang Yijun still hadn't come out. No. Huixin frowned, went to knock on the bathroom door, but still did not see it open. No way! How dare these little devils act so recklessly? No. Huixin broke the house again, kicked the bathroom door open, and saw a scene that was both funny and sad. Trong Di Quan was wrapped tightly around the neck by the shower head, but the black thing coming out of the shower head looked like hair. Why do these people keep wanting to rip off Zhang Yijuan's head? In Ghost City, he had seen the old woman who owned a paper money shop use human heads for sacrifices. Parasitic worms also made people who were poisoned twist their own heads. The sacrificial altar outside Changyang Mountain was also made of human heads. Right now, at his house last night, he also saw a lot of human heads flying in formation, and in several previous cases, the victims also lost their heads. Now this clump of hair wants to twist Zhang Yijuan's head. Could it be that they really want to set up a sacrificial altar with real human heads? What are they trying to summon? Truong Di Quan had just put on his pants, but his upper body was still bare-chested. No Hao-Ai-Sin was afraid that Wai Lai would see him, so he kicked the door closed. Truong Di Quan had not yet passed out, and was still trying to pull his hair with his hands, but he seemed powerless. No Hao-Ai-Sin used the razor blade as a weapon and swung his hand to chop at the hair. Of course, there was a charm on the knife, but this hair was also very powerful. They quickly turned No Hao-Ai-Sin into prey. Even though it was daytime, this bathroom had no light at all. The lights had long since been turned off. The two of them were suspended from the ceiling by the hair, like two guests watching a play. What was looming around the wall was a group of people singing a Kai Luang opera. The singing was strange and eerie, like a Chio opera, and the costumes were elaborate. Because this type of opera had heavy makeup, when it appeared on the wall, it felt extremely eerie. No Hao-Ai-Sin was both amused and annoyed. It had been almost 1,000 years since he woke up, and no one had ever dared to hang him up like that. Such arrogance will surely die soon. Zhang Yijuan, who had only a little bit of life left, was scared out of his wits when he saw the opera image on the wall. The singing was horrifyingly shrill. The sound of drums and trumpets was no different from that of a funeral. And those opera girls, as soon as the curtain changed, they turned around and transformed into opera ghost images. The devil sings opera, which mortal can hear. Of course, after listening to the ghost opera, they will die. Chapter 15, Wai Lai. No Hao-Ai-Sin was out of patience. He was about to draw a talisman when there was a sound of kicking the door from outside. The person who kicked the door was Wai Lai, but it was Hao-Ai Nu carrying Wai Li's body. No Hao-Ai-Sin secretly smiled in his heart. He didn't know how long it had been since someone had worried about him. Ironically, that person was a ghost. The door just flew open. Behind Wai Lai suddenly grew 9 red fox tails. No Hao-Ai-Sin immediately recognized that they were the tails of a spirit fox. Yet Hao-Ai Nu was able to use those tails skillfully. After growing out, the tails moved continuously. 2 of them wrapped around the 2 people who were hanging. The remaining ones dealt with the hair demons. No Hao-Ai-Sin took back the talisman and quietly waited for Hao-Ai Nu to save him. Sure enough, in less than 5 minutes, Hao-Ai Nu had quickly dealt with the hair demons and brought the 2 people down to the ground safely. Hao-Ai Nu used her tail to drag Truong Di Quan out and put him on the bed, then returned the body to Wai Lai. A child with a powerful body and a soul, yet they coordinated so well with each other. Nearly an hour later, Truong Di Quan woke up. No Hao-Ai-Sin said to him, "I have to go to Truong Duong Mountain. It's too dangerous for you to stay here alone, so why don't you come with me?" "I can go, but what about Wai Lai?" Truong Di Quan said as he got out of bed to find clothes to put on. Without waiting for anyone to speak, Wai Lai took the initiative to say, "If it's not expensive, you can take me with you." "Haha, she is so smart. Wai Lai, Hao-Ai-Sin has a lot of money. It is best if we depend on him in the future," Truong Di Quan said as he high-fived Wai Lai, both of them smiling. No Hao-Ai-Sin plugged in his phone charger and said, "Truong Di Quan, you still haven't paid me this month's salary. You'll probably have to pay me more for protection in the future." "Hey man, who would do that? Then I am not human." Although Zhang Yijuan didn't quite understand what he meant, he felt that he couldn't refute it. People with money could travel without luggage, so the 3 of them quickly arrived at the airport. It wasn't the rainy season in the north yet, so the weather was quite nice. Wu Huixing still remembered that 3 years ago when he arrived, Q City welcomed him with a torrential downpour. After sitting on the plane for more than 3 hours, it was already 7 p.m. when they landed. They couldn't bring 2 people into the mountains at this time, so they decided to stay overnight. After 3 years, this place was finally a little more prosperous. Zhang Yijuan and Ili didn't have any questions about the trip, as if Wu Huixing was taking them to the underworld and they would follow. After a good night's sleep without any visitors, the next morning the bug's spirits seemed to have improved a lot. At 7 a.m., after eating and buying some things to bring along, No Hao-Sin asked for a place to rent a jeep to rent one to go into the mountains. The owner also asked for 2 pieces of ID and a deposit of 10 million, which was really nothing compared to the value of the car. This owner was either a rich person laundering money, or had a very good eye for people to do that. No Hao-Sin had a phenomenal memory. He didn't need a map, just relied on his memory to drive into the dead village. On the way, Wai Lai and Hao Nu just slept. Truong Di Quan took a lot of pictures. After driving for nearly 3 more hours, they finally saw a familiar village. In the past 3 years, although this village was no longer inhabited, many of the houses had been renovated. Although the materials were only wood, the repairmen seemed to have put in a lot of effort. The car stopped in front of a house, and the 3 of them got out. This was always the most spacious house in the village, and the gate was still wide open as always. No Hao-Sin entered the yard. The yard was planted with many kinds of flowers, and it was probably very well maintained. There was also a faint fragrance wafting from the house, attracting him to push the half-closed door and enter. The fragrance came from the pot of hot tea on the table. Also on the table were a vase of wild flowers, a plate of homemade cakes, and 6 cups. The owner is not here. No Hao-Sin led them around the mountain road, about 2 kilometers away. This place was deserted, and there was not a single person, only green trees and wild animals. But there appeared a figure, a girl with a ponytail, wearing a brocade outfit, standing there picking vegetables. As if she knew someone was coming, the girl turned around, a smile on her lips, and said, "Brother Hao-Sin, long time no see." No Hao-Sin also smiled. He said, "It seems like you knew I was coming? There are distinguished guests arriving at Truong Duong Mountain, of course you must know." That Noyet hugged the basket of vegetables and walked towards them. That Noyet's expression had improved a lot compared to that year. It seemed like she had overcome those sorrows and lived a decent life. As soon as they met, she said in surprise, "Lam Min, try it." "No, Brother Hao-Sin, you found that friend. Congratulations." Truong Di Quan's appearance was identical to Lam Min Triet's. They were both a little shorter than No Hao-Sin. Their skin was a little darker, but their faces were kind. The only difference between the 2 of them was probably their ears. Truong Di Quan's ears were bigger and shaped almost like Buddha's ears. When she looked at Wai Lai, that Noyet was even more surprised. That Noyet did not say anything, just looked at No Hao-Sin. The 2 of them exchanged glances. Wai Lai very lively ran over and pulled that Noyet's hand. "Sister, you are so beautiful." The 4 of them entered the house, but as soon as they reached the gate, they saw a familiar figure. It was Lam So. When Lam So saw No Hao-Sin, the first thing he said was, "Fairy, where's your long hair?" "Yeah, and you're much older." "That Noyet, don't tell me you too." No Hao-Sin was quite surprised, not believing that stormy trip would bring the 2 of them together. That Noyet smiled and said, "All these years, it was all thanks to him helping keep me company." Seeing Truong Di Quan looming behind, Lam So jumped up and said fiercely, "You bastard traitor, you still dare to follow No Hao-Sin?" Truong Di Quan was extremely confused, dodging first and thinking later. That Noyet pulled Lam So and punched him a few times. "That's Truong Di Quan." The atmosphere was somewhat awkward, no one said anything. That Noyet poured out 6 cups of tea, pushing 1 cup into the empty space, which belonged to Hao Nu. Indeed, after using the pearl that Chu Fan gave her, that Noyet's cultivation had progressed quite a bit. "Mr. Hao-Sin, you didn't come here just to drink tea, did you?" That Noyet dispelled the awkward atmosphere. No Hao-Sin said, "Your sister is still alive, somehow she became a cat." That Noyet knew that it wasn't important enough. She looked at No Hao-Sin waiting. He continued, "Has the Huyn Swang contacted you in the past 3 years? Currently in City H, there are cases where piano keys keep appearing at the crime scene. Not only that, I also received a few threatening messages, with the image of piano keys at the end. I'm wondering, are those things related to the it into Huyn Swang's words? If it has anything to do with her, she will definitely come back." That Noyet only replied with 1 sentence. Truong Di Quan drank tea and ate cake, then spoke noisily. "Do you 2 know each other?" "We are not just acquaintances, we have also been through life and death together." Lam So reluctantly butted in. That Noyet kicked him. "Lam So, you're really nosy." Zhang Yijuan heard the tomb, and when he heard Lin Su's name, he immediately took out his phone to check. His eyes lit up, then he smiled brightly and clung to Lin Su, saying, "Sorcerer Lin Su, it really is you. I'm a die-hard fan of yours. I really like the works you write." Mage Lam so. That Noyet was about to deal with Lam, so when No Hoai Sin pulled her out, that Noyet looked at Wai Lai and said, Brother Hoai Sin, I didn't see wrongly, right? That girl has the bones of a Lin Ho. I'm not sure either. Things are like this. No Hoai Sin told everything. That Noyet was confused after hearing it. She said, So where did you meet my sister? That was the time I told you, but I suspect she is related to Wu Chuangjiang. Wu Changjiang also came to H City. A few months after that breakup, I met Xiao Fan once when I was patrolling the mountains. She told me that she followed Lin Mingzhi's scent to find the ghost seal, while Wu Changjiang went out to find the Yinyang seal. No Hoai Sin stood silently looking at Truong Duong Mountain. He still remembered the time when Lam Min Triet swallowed the devil seal, and the Yinyang seal, and Fan Vin disappeared without a trace. Fan Vin was the person he was least wary of. Could it be that he had something to do with the Yinyang seal? Regardless of the truth, if Wu Chuangjiang was in H City, then the Yinyang seal must be somewhere. Mr. Hoai Sin, do you need my help? That Noyet was very grateful to No Hoai Sin. Fortunately, she was also very similar to him, very good at repaying others. No Hoai Sin shook his head and said, No need, just give me your phone number. If there is ever a real need, I will call you. Live like a real person. Back inside, Truong Di Quan had found his idol, following Lam So and chattering non-stop. After listening to Lam So talk nonsense, praising No Hoai Sin to the ninth cloud, when No Hoai Sin entered, he looked at him with eyes full of stars. No Hoai Sin shivered, walked over and sat next to Wai Lai, looking at her with a smile. No Hoai Sin, how can I pay you such a low salary? Do you need a raise? Truong Di Quan smiled brightly. No Hoai Sin said, You should give me a raise. Sure enough, Truong Di Quan turned off the radio. Lam So now took a closer look at No Hoai Sin. He said, Oh my God, did you cut your long hair? But I have to admit that you have really changed a lot. You are no longer cold and arrogant like before. At night, 5 people and 1 soul sat in front of the door drinking tea. Zhang Yijuan was extremely curious, even though Lin Su had warned him that this place was remote and mountainous, and it was easy to encounter wandering guests. He took his phone out to take pictures and search for information. For a horror author like him, this was truly a great opportunity. Wandering outside, they finally reached the end of the village. It was already past the full moon day, and the place was covered with trees, so even if there was a moon, there was no way to shine through. It was now 7 p.m., but the place was completely dark. There were no torches, only a single light from that Noyet's house. Because he was so engrossed in searching for information, he completely forgot that Noyet had said that this place used to be a dead village. All the houses here were uninhabited and were repaired by her alone. By the time he remembered that, it was too late. Just as he was about to turn back, Truong Di Quan saw that the houses in the village were already lit up. Could it be that it was lit by the 7th moon? Gritting his teeth to suppress his wandering thoughts, Truong Di Quan turned on his phone's light, touched his pocket, and oh my! No Hoai Sin's amulet was already at that Noyet's house. Truong Di Quan had heard that if we walk with our heels exposed, the devil will enter our body from behind. He didn't dare to run, even his steps were cautious. Step by step, he opened his phone to call No Hoai Sin, but oh no, the phone signal was gone. If he didn't run now, when would he? Truong Di Quan ran away. As he ran, he heard voices and laughter coming from both sides of the house. It felt like there were many people appearing inside the abandoned houses. Chapter 16, Forest Demons and Mountain Demons. Zhang Yijuan closed his eyes tightly and ran forward with his head bowed. Even though he was scared, he could still guess the distance. He should have arrived home by now. But no, when he opened his eyes, Zhang Yijuan cried silently, because he had run all the way to the end of the world. All around was just a dim darkness, thousands of trees, and it was not that Noyet's at all. Oh no! Truong Di Quan turned on the phone light, groped on the pendant to see if Hoai Nu was there. Luckily, Hoai Nu was sleeping soundly, so she was inside the pendant. Only then did she wake up and come out. Since she was little, Hoai Nu had only been in battle and in closed rooms, so she had never seen such a scene before. She thought that calling out would help, but that help only made Truong Di Quan even more afraid. What is this place? Zhang Yijuan, do you like playing adventure games? Hoai Nu clung to Truong Di Quan's side. She was also very scared and looked around. I don't know what No Hoai Sin was thinking to let Hoai Nu follow to protect Truong Di Quan. How would I know? It seems like I was led by a ghost. I remember that at that time, I closed my eyes and ran straight towards Tran that Noyet's house. Before Truong Di Quan could finish speaking, he received Hoai Nu's face, which was fiercely pressed against his. She said, I beg you, you ran with your eyes closed. You deserve to be led by a ghost. Let you live or die, I'm going back to sleep. Hearing that, Truong Di Quan quickly covered the pendant and said, You can't do that, I will tell No Hoai Sin. Hoai Nu was discouraged, after all, she was still very afraid of No Hoai Sin. Hoai Nu was in charge of pointing the way, Truong Di Quan was holding the light. Both of them carefully walked back. But unfortunately, they had not gone a few steps when they heard crows cawing a few times, then the surroundings started to have cheerful laughter and chatter. The wind blew past their heads, carrying the sound of laughter that echoed through the air. The sound of laughter suddenly became unusually cold. This time, Zhang Yijuan realized it very early. He said, Can we run? Ha ha ha. Cold laughter rang out simultaneously. Hoai Nu helplessly shook her head. They were now trapped in a circle, unable to leave. Swish, 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 3 sounds. Zhang Yijuan's back was cold, goosebumps all over. He was walking back and forth when he tripped over a rock and fell. The light of his phone just swept past a tree branch. That image made him fall to the ground. On the branches of the nearby tall trees, long-tongued ghosts appeared. They were hanging upside down from the trees, their long tongues hanging down to the ground. Just at this moment, his phone coincidentally ran out of battery and turned off. It was true that bad luck often came at the same time. Zhang Yijuan cried without tears, mumbling scriptures. Hold on a little longer, I'll go find No Hoai Sin to save you. Hoai Nu had already flown away. Truong Di Quan fell into a state of despair. But he was far from giving up. As soon as Hoai Nu left, he stuffed his phone back into his pocket, stood up and tried to find a way to escape. In the pitch-black night, he heard hissing sounds all around, probably from those lazy ghosts. Sure enough, the city is still better, at least there is a road to run. Hoai Nu quickly entered the house to report the news, just as No Hoai Sin was about to go find Truong Di Quan. That Noyet also quickly stood up. She said, Lam So, you stay with Wai Lai, I will go with Hoai Sin to save people. Okay, everyone be careful. With only the two of them left, Lam So brought Wai Lai into the house. It had been a long time since this place had been peaceful. Even if he stayed alone overnight, nothing would happen. Could it be that those ghosts were really targeting Truong Di Quan? Wai Lai was very obedient. She sat on the chair next to Lam So. She was reading a book. It was almost 8 p.m. now. The surroundings were quiet except for the occasional sound of insects and wild animals. After the two of that Noyet had been walking for about 10 minutes, Lam So discovered that something was wrong. The temperature gradually became colder, and the yin energy also began to move somewhere in the yard. A talisman had been placed in front of that Noyet's house, so they couldn't get in. While I didn't realize it, only Lam So was anxious and worried. After all, he was still a human without any power. The rustling sound echoed all around the house. Lam So felt like a big snake was crawling around, and it was gradually tightening around the house. He quickly called Wai Lai to stand beside him, then took the talisman that No Hoai Sin left behind to defend. Normally speaking, the demons of this mountain area should not dare to invade the mountain god's house. So could it be that they were demons chasing after Wu Huaixing and his men? Lin Su sighed inwardly. After all, after 3 years of not seeing each other, Wu Huaixing still had such a grudge against the demons. Uncle Lam So, do you hear anything? I heard something like a big snake breathing. Wai Lai suddenly grabbed Lam So's arm, her pretty face slightly wrinkled. Lam So reassured Wai Lai. Don't be afraid, Uncle will protect you. I'm not afraid. I'm not even afraid of Hoai Sin. Lin Su frowned as he looked at Li. With her appearance and age, she should be crying and shaking right now. But she looked calmer than him, even though she seemed to understand very well what was outside. Indeed, people who could accompany Wu Huaixing were all extraordinary people. At this moment, even though nothing broke, the two of them felt the sound of a house collapsing. Lin Su hugged Li to his chest, raising the talisman high in front of him in vigilance. A sticky mess fell from somewhere, making Lin Su even more certain that there was a huge snake outside. Uncle Lam So, get out of the way. Wai Li's voice rang out softly, then it used its hand to push Lam So away. Indeed, Lam So looked back. The snake suddenly poked its head in from the front door. Didn't the 4 ghosts corpse all die in the ghost city? Even though the snake in front of him was a bit strange and deformed, Lin Su had already fought with them in the tomb, so how could he not recognize its stench? Lin Su turned to press the talisman against its forehead, which only caused it to retract its head and did nothing. It had lost its voice, and now all the murderous intent was concentrated in its eyes. It stuck out its excessively long tongue, wanting to bring it inside the house. Lam So still held on to the talisman, trying to protect himself and Wai Lai until that Noyet returned. The demon swiped the talisman, sending Lam So flying to the side. Wai Lai ran over to support Lam So, his eyes wide open as he looked at the demon. It was a strange look, something that should not have appeared in a child under 10 years old. Lam So's ribs ached, but he still tried to pull Wai Lai behind him to protect her. Wai Lai, don't act rashly, you'll get hurt. But Wai Lai didn't listen, it pushed his hand away and walked towards the door. Lam So crawled after it and was immediately whipped by the demon again. Lam So was originally holding Wai Lai and taking the beating for it. At this moment he was in excruciating pain. An angry expression appeared on Wai Li's face. It suddenly shivered. From behind its back slowly grew 9 red tails. Lam So was so scared that his face turned pale. These 9 red tails belonged to the spirit fox, their obsession 3 years ago. Why did Wai Lai grow the tail of the spirit fox? Did that demon chase her here, because of Wai Lai? The 9 tails just appeared and immediately swung towards the demon. But the demon did not dare to fight back. It endured the blows for a while, then retreated and hid. Lam So dragged his aching body and pulled Wai Li's shirt when the girl fell limp and unconscious. At this time, No Hai Sin and that Noyet had followed Hai Nu to find Truong Di Quan. Indeed, these forest ghosts and mountain demons were used to building walls. This was very easy for that Noyet. After all, it was really not right to let No Hai Sin's people be taken away by ghosts in her territory. That Noyet's skills were still very good. Her eyes and nose were still as sharp as ever. She used a Zippo lighter to light it up and threw it forward, waving her hand in the air before entering. No Hai Sin followed behind. Suddenly he felt a tickling sensation on his neck. It felt like something had fallen from above. He just raised his head to look and a bloody face landed, only a few inches away from his face. No Hai Sin felt disgusted, punched the other face, it groaned in pain and quickly ran away. The person just threatened to play for fun, but who would have thought No Hai Sin would be mean and really hit it, causing serious injury? Hai Nu flew beside her. The little girl looked extremely timid, quickly jumped forward to show that Noyet the way. But at this moment, they all stopped and simultaneously raised their heads to look up at the sky. This section of the forest was sparse and not tall, roughly enough to see the stars. But right now it was all just a patch of darkness without a single star in sight. From the strangely quiet space, distant rumbling sounds came. Those sounds were hard to describe, both creepy and cold. The 2 people and 1 ghost looked up at the same time. As the sounds got closer, they saw the top of the tall tree starting to glow. It was the light of fire. Many fireballs larger than a person's head were floating. What was even more terrifying was that each of those large fireballs had a head underneath them. It was unclear what the head looked like, only long, flowing hair could be seen. They were slowly flying over their heads. This was some kind of ritual, some kind of evil and monstrous ritual. Because both No Hai Sin and that Noyet had never heard of this kind of demon. The Yin Yang seal and the Ghost seal were both in danger of being somewhere in the human world. The person who used it was hiding in this crowded crowd. What is the meaning of these head rituals? The 2 demon seals are out there, and whoever used them definitely has no good intentions. If they really act, I'm afraid the world won't have many more peaceful days.